All right, folks, I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Easthampton Planning Board for Tuesday, November 20th, 2018. Is there anyone here that wants to speak about anything that's not on the agenda tonight? All right, moving right along. No minutes, no A&Rs. So the first matter is a continued public hearing for One Industrial Lofts LLC seeking special permit and site plan approval for property located at 1 Ferry Street. Welcome back.
Good evening.
So you want to update us on some of the developments since we last saw you?
We haven't started it yet.
Okay, that's always good.
Just kidding. Rob Levesque from our Levesque Associates here with me this evening is Mr. Michon, also his attorneys from Fitzgerald Attorneys at Law, Brad Martin, and Zig Porth, the architect. Didn't want to forget Ziggy. So since the last public hearing, we have provided some supplemental information related to traffic, related to some of the engineering comments. I believe before you should have a response letter from our Levesque Associates with a kind of a parking, we'll call it a parking, preliminary parking analysis. Looks something like this, if you can see that. And then probably more importantly, that data is kind of boiled down on that last page. So I'd like to go through the parking stuff with you guys tonight.
Great.
Also have a memo from McMahon Associates. McMahon had looked at the movements. There's a number of figures in this report that has the turning movements, but I'm going to probably skim over a lot of it and get kind of down to the meat of the matter, if that's okay.
Great.
If it pleases the board, I would probably move forward from where I was at the last public hearing if there's no one that needs a recap from what we had previous.
I think that's fine, yeah.
Great, thank you. I'll start with the Levesque letter dated November 19th. There were a few comments from Dan Murphy, the city engineer. And if it's okay, I'll read the question and our basic response. They're pretty brief. So utility layout looks good with the water loop. We said no comment. Number 2 was applicant may desire to include additional values to isolate sections of on-site mains. Does applicant plan on individual meters for the individual residential units? The answer is yes, we will be providing individual meters for the residential units. The number 3, a detailed parking breakdown has been provided, so we'll be going through that tonight. Number 4, the proponent has reviewed the site plan with the Easthampton Emergency Services. Specifically, I believe, Mike, you met with the fire chief and others, or just the fire chief?
Yep, fire chief and
Wayne Hedman.
So that issue, just to clarify for people who don't have the record, that was about vehicle or emergency vehicle access on that bridge underneath the building 7, right, that goes to the back?
Exactly. There's a question as to whether or not there would be access and whether they could get emergency vehicles back under that building right there.
And so the first answer is yes, they can, right? And then also you've clarified that with the authorities so they know that.
That is correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Thank you. Number 5, we'll kind of get into during traffic, but 5 was the traffic movements into and out of the site, anticipated increases in movements at Ferry Street, Lovefield Street intersection. We can talk about that. I'll punt that forward if that's okay. Peak hour estimated traffic is 219 vehicles with 2,300 trips, and the engineer was asking if we would potentially connect to Lovefield Street. So we talked about this a little bit last time.
We did.
I don't know if I can go away from it.
Yeah, that's okay, yeah.
Oh, okay. Talked about it a little bit last time, but there's our site access is here and here. Obviously, there's a canal in between with the connection over the top. So there was a question of as to whether we could connect to Lovefield Street somewhere to potentially alleviate some of the traffic. But I think what you'll see not only in the traffic memo that was provided, but also as we discussed it a little bit further, there's a lot of impediments to trying to get that done. There's some grade changes. There's a sewer main there. There's obviously the bike path, which would require a connection. And when you see the numbers on the roundabout, we're talking about seconds delay between the proposed condition and what you have now. So it's really fairly minimal. So that's that item. Assume proponent has explored the use of demo and brick material. Yes, I know that's a brief response, but yes, they do plan on reusing any material they can as a potential base for some of the parking areas. So that's being looked at, and that's actually folded into some of our cost estimating at this point.
Okay, great.
There was a question about parking area islands. Normally, in a lot of urban areas, they'll try to use, they call them tree box filters or parking island, green, what is he used for? Rain gardens. The problem here is that we have such tight material. Basically, what we have out there are slabs of concrete, then urban fill, which is all different types of fill, not that permeable, and then underlain by silts and call it pretty much a clay. So it's really tight. There's not a real opportunity for infiltration. So those rain garden type of situations in such a small area, they're really not going to help and be impactful from a water quality standpoint, and they're really going to be more of a maintenance issue because they really won't exfiltrate out of the bottom of that structure. So
While we're on that, you were at Concom last night, is that right?
we were.
Okay, and everything was approved there?
We were.
Stormwater, I assume this came up, or this was discussed there?
It was, and
Okay.
stormwater is reviewed as part of the redevelopment project under the Mass DEP Stormwater Management Standards that came out in 2008. So that got reviewed by DEP. We were issued a file number from DEP. As part of the application last night, we submitted a stormwater application to the Conservation Commission, who would be the permit granting authority for that in this case. They approved the stormwater permit, and they also issued an order of conditions, 2 orders of conditions, one for each side.
Okay.
Just to keep it cleaner for us, we decided to do one order on the track 1 on the left side here, or the left side, and then track 2 had another order of conditions, just to keep it clean, so that when, call it track 1 is built out, we can get the certificate of compliance for that, and then those owners or Mr. Michon, assuming if you were to retain ownership of the entire project, could get that certificate.
Okay.
Okay. So the last one was 9, and it talks about rear-end collisions onto Lovefield Street. So there is a response in the engineering memo. That is part of, we're talking about this angled parking that's shown here on Lovefield Street. And the response from the traffic engineer was that it was suitable and that it does have the required stopping sight distance and whatnot. That said, that's not currently, we're not currently asking for that as approval, for an approval on that as part of this application. We're obviously only asking for the site development. This will be vetted. Right now, I would say that they're probably at 25 or 35% design. With that, McMahon Associates did do that design. We anticipate that they will take that through the 100% design, go out to bid in construction. So we'd be happy to work with DPW on that. So worst case scenario, if that parking does go away, it is not currently taken into consideration in our parking analysis that you've received.
Okay, so rather than use those parking spots to cause an issue with the traffic, we'll approve the traffic as is, and then you can deal with the plan on the parking at the other end.
Right.
Okay.
That other parking area will come up with mass where.
Right, right. And that's not on site, right? Is that?
Correct.
That's on the
That's within the right of way.
revised roadway there, yeah, okay.
Yep. So that was our memo. If you would be so kind as to flip 2 pages, you'll see that, and feel free to obviously look at how we're breaking down each building as requested, as we broke down each building based on use, and then based on the number of parking spaces generated based on a typical off-street parking requirement. Obviously in the Mill District it's a little bit different, but we wanted you to at least get an idea based on your parking calcs. So we did that, and really I'm going to oversimplify this for a second and kind of boil it down to the line, the last line that you see here, which kind of describes it. So the way we're looking at this project is that the residential portion of the project, the parking generated by this, or the parking requirement generated by the residential portion, 2 pieces to it. There's 2-bedroom units and there's single bedroom units. So what we did is we calculated 2-bedroom units at 2 spaces, and we did the 1-bedroom units at 1.5 space per unit. It seemed logical to us. It's not your parking calc. Your parking calc is 2, but oftentimes in these multi-family projects, we find that as you get higher up in number, a lot of the municipalities will graduate that. So, for example, Holyoke, the first 50 units are required to have 2 spaces per unit. The next 50 are 1.5, and so on. So it kind of graduates it down. So with that, we have a parking space requirement under the formal regs of 242.5, and Mike asked me what .5 was. I guess that's a mini car, but 242.5 spaces was how the calc came out. So the thought process here is if you're utilizing this development during the day for parking, we figure that 70% of the folks that reside there would be gone at work, running errands, whatever they're doing. So we figured a percentage of 30% that would be at home working on a laptop from home or whatever they're doing, or watching their kids, whatever they're doing. So we anticipate that based on 30%, so 242 is the first number. That's the parking required for the amount of housing that we're proposing under this proposal. Then you take 30% of that left over during the day would be 73 parking spaces, okay, for those residents that remain there on site during the day. So you add that to 222 spaces that would be required for the commercial uses that we're proposing. And that gives us a total of 295 spaces required during the daytime hours. So if you look at what we've provided, and it might be blocked out on the one, I don't know if you see it, but it's black. I can't really read it because the highlighted. But I want to say it was like within, I think we're within a few. Do you have that on yours? Is it clearer?
Yeah. Which line are you looking at? Or you can't see it?
Mine are highlighted. Do you have the color? Oh, perfect. Thank you.
The copies have let.
Yeah, the copies made it dark, so it's blocked out my numbers. But yeah, so the total parking available, if you're not including the on-street parking on Ferry Street, so excluding that, the total parking available is 296 spaces. So we're within 1 space. We're just under. And then if you look at the cumulative parking available, and this does not include, I don't believe this includes Love Field. I'm almost positive, but I believe this includes Ferry. I know it includes Ferry. I'm pretty sure it doesn't include Love Field. So
if I'm understanding correctly, 464.5 is what's required, and even that's with the 1.5 calculation as opposed to the 2 for the 1.
That's correct.
And 325 at the end of the day is what we have. So
correct.
Given that the number is already down a little lower at 1.5, but I tend to agree with that assessment, we're still under significantly.
Right. If you were to calculate each individual use and didn't take into consideration the symbiotic relationship between the uses, the mixed uses, absolutely you're at that 464.5 number, which is a significant number, and obviously, most of those spaces would be empty most of the time.
What is the parking requirement for the zone? Because it's not.
Right.
I think it's the.
So the mill district is intended to, it's section 9, which is what the primary section that this is regulated under. For the mill industrial district, it's intended to be comprehensive. It does not require the board to go to the other parking section of the ordinance.
Right.
So what you are really doing is under the special permit criteria, you're making a finding that basically that there is a provision for off-street parking. You would assume that your finding is that it's adequate.
Somehow reasonable based on what they've told us.
Right. And I think if you do take a step back and look at the purpose of the mill district, which is really to encourage all these mix of uses to go into these buildings, the vision was not to require all the parking for each use to stack it up. You would never get the mills revitalized with that parking requirement. So instead of 2 spaces per unit or some calculation for commercial retail, the board is tasked with making a finding that the parking provided is adequate. So I believe that there's enough information here for you to potentially do that.
Yeah.
But the key is that you don't need to, I guess you can look at Article 10 for a reference point and know that for like a standard multifamily development somewhere else, it'd be 2 spaces per unit, but you're not bound by that, so you could go somewhere in between.
So I have a couple parking questions. One is the 30% of tenants during the day. Is that like an industry standard, or is that just the number that worked out to get you at 295 underneath 296?
Worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
No, I talked to Mike about it. Mike obviously has the other mill. It was an estimate based on what we both felt was reasonable. It's not overly scientific.
Right, okay. And then my other one is, so on the page before where you have the breakdown of the different kind of uses, my understanding is a lot of this is unallocated, no tenants, right? So is this sort of your dream scenario for sort of how you'd like to see the uses, how the property would be used, and how much of a deviation would there be if you don't end up having a coffee shop, or you have 2 delis instead of 1, you know?
So we've had a lot of discussions about that as early on as what we're currently dealing with in our current pending process. Mike and I have had discussions about the potential for changes of users or tenants. What we find is that as we generate commercial uses, potentially office uses, they actually, if you do the calc for the same amount of space, generally speaking, you're going to increase the parking requirement. So Mike will have to be careful, and we'll have to be careful not to overload commercial and try to provide a reasonable amount of residential to offset that, because that 70% that we're talking about, I mean, I guess if you look at that, right, you know, if you were all commercial, you don't get that 70% benefit of people going to work, right? So that's why the mixed use works with the residential. So we did talk about that, you know, with your planner a little bit, and also amongst ourselves, and we kind of landed on what we anticipated would be the minimum number of units that we would end up with residential, and that was discussed at around 50% of what's proposed. We anticipate it will be more than that, but that basically doesn't tie the developer's hands. It lets him have a little bit of flexibility, because we'll tell you, and Mike can tell you with his experience with Mill 180, it changes daily. You know, who's interested, and you know, once you get folks in there, hopefully they stay a while. But even your tenants are changing all the time.
So you anticipate not only the flexibility between the commercial uses, but that you might not hold fast to that 152 residential units. You may want to convert some of that to commercial space as well.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think we're at I think the current layout has us in the 140 range, 145. Is that right? Something like 143, something like that.
Okay. So your idea is that we would approve a minimum of 75 residential units, and then if you needed to go below that for some reason, that would trigger your need to come get an amended special permit or something like that, but you would have that flexibility from our permit here?
Yeah, so that Mike could kind of move forward working with tenants, knowing he had a permit in place. Ideally, you know, a lot of those would be residential, you know, probably over 100, but we don't know that. You know, one of the discussions that's currently really not on the table, because it's not allowed under the zoning district, that I think everybody liked the idea of, was the potential for a hotel. That's probably one of the big factors in that residential piece. If there's a really good hotel operator that would love to hop in one of these mills and do a you know, a boutique style hotel, that might be a really nice fit for everyone. So that might have an effect on the residential.
Is the 150, I know you got a question, I'm sorry.
No, take it.
Is the 150 sort of your best case scenario for the most residential units you would want, or would you want sort of some flexibility above that? 150 is about as high as you'd be interested in going?
Well, yeah, we wouldn't be able to go any higher than that.
Okay.
For what we have proposed right
Yep.
now. For buildings, building square footages. Unless we went higher. Then we wouldn't have the parking.
Yeah. All right.
And that's one thing, let me just point this out, is the last thing a building owner wants is parking wars.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, you know, we might have somebody that comes in and say they want a space, but they're a call center, and they have 200 employees. It just doesn't work.
Right.
From a management standpoint.
Yep.
There is going to be covered parking under one of these buildings? It's
Two
stacked
buildings.
under 2 of them.
Right, this is building 7, so
Okay.
under building 7 and under building 5.
So my question is, are people who are going to be going there for commercial purposes or whatever going to have access to that covered parking, or is that going to... Okay, so then how do you know where your 30% of stay-at-home residents are going to be parked? And will that parking that is vacated by people leaving, how are your other visitors going to know that there's additional parking if the parking lot, the outside parking lot is full?
It's a good question. It's really an operational issue. Right now, Mike has communication with his tenants, very specific communication about parking arrangements because they have the same exact scenario. So it's going to be something that will have to be put in place with a parking plan. Also, as we discussed as late as today with your planner, there will be some reciprocal easements put in place in the control and the understanding of how those easements work because some of the parking is being funded by MassWorks. All of that will be worked out, all that detail probably will be based on the boilerplate that you've seen at Mill 180. I mean, that's a pretty significant sized building. You probably noticed it doesn't have a lot of extra parking. I think all the mills are in the same boat. But they're making it work, and you know, it's a nice, vibrant area. You might have to fight for a spot here and there, and I think that's the reality. If this is as successful as we want it to be, you know, I think there's worse problems to have than trying to find a parking space. It's really worse for the building owner than it will be for anybody else.
Sure, I mean, he'll feel some of that pain, but so how many of those 325? Okay, so it's, but there's also reserve spots, right, for tenants, both commercial and residential, right? Didn't we talk about that?
Those are in the building.
So right now I have not delineated any reserve spaces. I haven't, you know, that's going to be an operational thing for Mr. Michon, and if it's something that he might be able to answer. But under the buildings, there's currently 98 spaces provided. So that's that number. So if you look to that same page there, you'll see that there's 98 spaces on the west side of the canal. So the east side is all surface parking. The west side does have those 98 spaces under the building.
And so, so now I'm trying to figure out what number of spaces are really going to be public spaces, more or less.
There's 106 on that side.
Okay.
On the west side. However, there east of the canal, there's another 92. So there's about, we'll call it 198 parking spaces total that are not under a building.
Okay, and I think when we talked about the phasing, even though what you're calling Tract 2, that part of the project is happening, the construction will happen later, the parking is going to be part of Phase 1, is that right?
It will be, and generally it will be. There's certain aspects. I don't know exactly the timing of how that will be built out, but we talked the other day about how the catwalks will need to be built. Probably not building 1, maybe not even building 5, but certainly before building 7 comes online, those catwalks will need to be in place. The parking will need to be accessible, you know, the entrance down, so that people can park on the east side, get across the catwalks. Those other buildings might not be erected yet, but
Connection to the bike path.
the connection to the bike path will be early on in the process. We anticipate it's part of the MassWorks stuff. So
Okay.
that'll be pretty
And
quick.
so, sorry, Chet, 1 second. So it sounds like, Mr. Michon, maybe you can answer this about, of the 198 that are sort of outdoor spots, based on what you're doing at Mill 180, do you expect that some of those may be reserved for either residential or commercial tenants, or are they all going to sort of be open to the public, as it were?
So the ones that are open to the public are the ones that are part of the MassWorks program. So basically, that would be pretty much right along here,
Okay.
and then these here.
Okay. Well, when I say public, though, I mean a customer who's coming to the deli who's a tenant or something like that. I mean, though, I just wanted.
There's going to be no, so maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there will be restrictions on parking after a certain hour.
Correct.
So anything up to, say that, and I don't know if it's 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at your current facility? What is it?
I think it's 11 o'clock.
So after 11 o'clock, the residents will be able to park when, you know, ideally most of these places are closed. I can't imagine there's really going to be much open after 11 o'clock, but if there is, there's probably only a few uses. So the majority of the uses will be closed. Those residents will be able to find a space if they got to jockey their car from another location. That'll be part of it. And my understanding is there probably will be somewhat of a premium for the parking under the buildings. Is that fair to say?
Correct, yeah.
And as
So-
far as customers who are coming to these businesses, so during those, will all of those exposed spots, not the ones inside the building, be kind of up for grabs, or they're going to be, okay, they won't be restricted during business hours?
No.
Correct.
The only restrictions that we'll have that'll be posted will be on the MassWorks parking spaces that'll say there's no parking after between the hours of 11 and 6 a.m. unless you're a resident and have a parking sticker.
Okay,
And that's the only, especially when that happens in the wintertime, we have to be able to notify all of our tenants by email of what the plowing schedule is gonna be.
Yep.
So if somebody happens to be on the bike path at 11 o'clock at night and it starts to snow, they're gonna get towed. It'd be very similar to municipal parking.
yeah. So just to clarify then, those MassWorks spots that you're talking about are literally public spots.
They are.
They're for people to, you know,
Absolutely.
I can park there and then bike on the right.
First come, first served.
Okay,
Yeah, just like a regular municipal lot.
okay. I'm sorry, Chet.
Well, I'm just sort of confused on something. If I'm a tenant, do I have, and I have a two-bedroom apartment, my 2 spaces, are they going to be my spaces? If I leave and 3 hours later I come back, no one's gonna be in my space, is there? You're not gonna throw they can just go and park in my space?
Go ahead.
So I think I can answer that. So if you're in a premium spot, we'll call it, underneath the building, we would anticipate that those would be restricted and numbered or, identified that that's your space. So if you have a 2-bedroom unit, you would have 2 spaces underneath, or if you don't pay for 2 spaces, you pay for 1, however that ends up working out with Mr. Michon. My understanding is, on the surface parking, everything would be first come, first served during the day, and then after 11 p.m., if you have a parking sticker for, 1 Ferry Street, they would then tow anybody else out of the way that's there after a certain hour or something like that.
Correct.
So if I have an apartment that's not under, that's outside, my parking spot is open for grabs,
That's correct.
then why would I want to go there if I'm not going to have a parking spot?
Is your
I mean,
bike
I
ride-
really want to know, because I'm concerned with the off-street parking too.
So there'll be, it's not that there's not parking there. There'll be parking, and we anticipate, based on the uses that we're proposing, and we'll be paying close attention to that. We anticipate that there will be parking spaces. Are you gonna park in the same spot if you live there every day? No. You're gonna,
More than likely, if I'm, like me, I'm handicapped, I'd have to park in the same spot.
you would have a good space.
Well, wouldn't some of that come up in your lease with
Yeah, that's-
especially if you're a residential tenant, you're going to be hopefully reading your lease agreement, which would spell out the particulars of what you might have access to
Right,
and
I'm
when.
gonna be spelled out that if I go out for a couple of hours, I may not have my parking spot, but I can go somewhere else and park.
Correct.
Right.
Because
Or
you-
you'll make a
Walk.
or you'll make a decision to pay extra, presumably for a reserved spot, so that you know,
Right.
spot 122 is my spot, it's by the door to my apartment, I'll pay extra every month to get that spot. I think
Well,
that sort of
no,
falls
I
into
just-
kind of the market forces and the relationship between the landlord and the tenant.
And that is how
No, I'm
I would
just
believe most of the
confused
mills
if I
operate
had
currently.
If I had a spot that I'm paying for and I had a parking spot in front of that door and I leave and come back and there's another car there, I gotta go somewhere else to park and walk to get to my apartment, which I would probably call my home, which,
I'd like to comment that,
I think your statement is accurate, though.
Yeah.
I think you're understanding it correctly. I think it's important to note that we're not talking about thousands of linear feet to walk. You're talking,
Right.
everything is, all of our parking is pretty compact. It's right there, where you're probably within, the farthest point, maybe 200 or so feet from any entrance to any of the buildings.
well, that's, like you said, it's gonna be explained in the lease anyway.
Yep.
so I'm pleased to see these numbers broken down. It gives us a clearer picture. Thank you for doing that. I do think it's tight, but I think you're well aware of it. I think you've got experience balancing this, and you've really said the right things as far as I'm concerned in terms of understanding how it's going to be balanced. I definitely think there's going to be days where an event occurs, it'll be overflow from something that's a half shell or who knows what, where it's going to be, it'll be problematic. And I'm curious to see how that develops. But overall, I think it's the best we can do, and I think that it meets my criteria for safety.
Just briefly, while we're touching on the apartment units, there was discussion last time about sort of the workforce housing and mass housing approval. Has there been any progress on that? Is there anything?
So that's
done?
actually been a hot item that's been discussed back and forth, I believe, with the mayor, the planner, and the proponent. Right now, where it stands is that I would call that a pending item. My understanding is there's been some changes to the workforce housing and how that works financially. So the proponent is looking at a financial pro forma associated with that, and that I think will be to be determined. So I think right now, it's logical to know that we're that basement that we talked about, that lower level. Or, I'm sorry, I'm not explaining it well. The lower amount of housing, the lowest amount of housing that we'll go to would be the 75 units. Right now, the makeup of what would be workforce or market rate is undetermined at this point.
Did you mention 30, I think, at the last meeting was the target number?
Correct.
But that none of that is actually part of the plans that you're proposing here. It's really
Correct.
aspirational and not what you're looking to have approved.
Correct.
Okay.
Well,
I don't-
we want the mixed-use project approved with the understanding that there will be housing.
Right.
We anticipate the minimum housing would be 75 units, but certainly the ownership or the financial
Any sort of income requirements or anything?
Income requirements would not be.
Would be flexible.
Would be flexible, yeah.
I just want to comment, just so you can understand, the whole project entirely. Let's say, for instance, a hotel operator wants to come in and take that entire building. That's what I'm kind of having in the back of my mind. So, I mean, our plan is originally to have this be a housing project, market workforce housing. But because of the changes with workforce housing, it may not work 100%. So that's why we need that flexibility.
And I'll just say that where the planning board may not condition the approval on income qualifications, we're still looking carefully at the Mass Works grant to figure out how connected the Mass Works is to that initiative. If Mass Works, has flexibility, then the developer would have that as rigid with what was applied for and how that was articulated. Then we'll have some, potential income qualified units in there. So, what the important thing I think to articulate is that just like with the parking, the mill district overlay was, I believe, intended to be one of the most flexible tools we have, and it doesn't require a development have affordable housing connected to it. It's certainly a nice option, and we're encouraging it, and the Mass Works folks seem to like that, but it's hard at this point for the planning board to require it. Whether we look at that in the future for zoning purposes, maybe we should, but I think at least right now it's become clear that the mill district was intended to just make sure that the mills are occupied with the least amount of constraints, and there's pros and cons to that, but there's a reality that we're looking at with the zoning too.
Okay, and it occurs to me we should probably have some sort of update on the MassWorks grant process, because there was a decision on that, right? And there was already money awarded, but that's still going on?
Right, and so, one of the gaps in information that we are looking at now is that the State Executive Office of Economic Development came out and awarded the city the grant, $3.5 million towards the public infrastructure, but we don't have the contract. We don't know the particulars of what is required in terms of the connection to the project to the MassWorks stuff. So
I can speak a little bit to what
Sure,
we've been
that'd be great.
experienced. So in the past, we've probably been involved in 3 or 4 MassWorks grants that have been awarded. One being Mr. Michon's. Typically, what happens is the paperwork comes through from MassWorks. The city works closely with them, and then we have a little bit of a shortfall in our funding based on our cost estimates. So we can get funded for the whole amount. So we're looking to make that up which we have available sources and mechanisms in place that we will be making that up. Won't get into the details of those, but we anticipate that that will be fairly straightforward. So as we formulate how that's happening, what funding sources are in place, and what it is that what that final project is that we finalize with MassWorks, we'll have most likely the traffic engineer that's been working on it to date, McMahon Associates, would finish off those drawings. They would have to be contracted with the city. They finish those drawings off to call it 90% drawings. Those go out to bid. Ideally, that happens through the winter, and ideally we're out to bid. Let's call it, February. Maybe something is awarded, but ideally something is awarded as early as April, and they could start work, this coming season, 2019. That would be ideal, and I don't see why it wouldn't happen that way, but there's a lot of factors. But generally speaking, that's what has happened, and I would anticipate that they would probably finish in one construction season, and that they would maybe be buttoning up punch list items through 2020, spring of 2020.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Thank you.
Love to talk about traffic.
Yeah, anybody, board members have any other questions about the parking before we move on to traffic?
The only item that I just wanted to specifically address is that there is discussion of the reciprocal easement concept on the right side of the drawing. The main parking area of most interest is the row of, let's say, 25 on the left-hand side of the site, which is actually on city-owned property. So that is the most important one for the city's interest, looking at reciprocal easements, to make sure that on city-owned land paid for with public funds is the most available to the public, whereas the reciprocal easement might have more details about that right-hand side parking, which there would be more flexibility to come to terms on when it could be open to the public and not. But it's that city-owned sliver that is one of the particular ones that the public access will be fairly important. So that was my understanding, is that the Ferry Street parallel parking and the Love Field nose-in parking was not included in your calculations for purposes of meeting parking
I believe the
requirements?
Ferry Street was included in there. We have two different.
There's a section for street parking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cumulative parking available is 325. So we had additional 29 street parking. So
So you did, yeah.
So those ones on the left on the city-owned property, are those also going to be sticker only after 11 p.m.? Is that the plan? Okay.
The reciprocal easement agreements are even by the grantor.
Yep.
They're the same both ways.
Okay. All right, let's move on to McMahon.
So you had suggested traffic. So through the chair, I'd be happy to kind of break the traffic memo down. There's a lot of information, it's multiple pages, but there was a few questions that were looked at. One, what was the level of service at the intersections? There's a paragraph on page 2 that I think boils it down right after the table. I'll skip right to that. This is based on a review of the capacity analysis. The roundabout intersection approaches are shown to operate at a level of service A during the weekday morning peak hour, at a level of service B or better during the weekday afternoon peak hour. With the proposed project in place during the weekday morning peak hour, the southbound and northbound approaches are each projected to incur 1 second of delay and continue to operate under capacity. With the proposed project in place during the weekday afternoon peak hour, each of the approaches are projected to incur 2 seconds of delay and continue to operate under capacity.
That is minimal.
Yeah, it's pretty minimal. When I was talking to Paul Fergal again today, he basically said the roundabout's going to take care of everything, and it works famously. Is basically what he said. He did also comment on the access to Lovefield Street, and I think that we've covered that, so I won't belabor that point. And then the Lovefield Street parking, which I think might be an item that you want to discuss. And I'll read that. McMahon has prepared a fastest path analysis to assist in determining anticipated operating speeds and their corresponding available stopping site distances. at the roundabout. Using the Federal Highway Administration guidance as listed in the National Cooperative Highway Research Program Report 672, the two fastest paths were developed and analyzed potential vehicle approach speeds in conflict to potential on-site parking maneuver on Lovefield Street. Based on the proposed geometry of the roundabout, vehicles approaching from Pleasant Street are capable of traveling at a velocity of 25 miles per hour, and vehicles from Ferry Street are capable of traveling 16 miles per hour. The two approaches would have an available stopping sight distance that exceeds the required stopping sight distance. The attached figure depicts the fastest path and their corresponding speeds. If I can find which one that is here. This is the one that looks like that. on that.
The last one, yeah.
Yeah. It is the last one. Of course it is. So you'll see that they have the calculated speed, the radius, the calculated speed for the stopping sight distance, and the required sight distance all included in that. So you'll see that they exceed that. So, I mean, as that comes up through work with DPW, that can certainly be adjusted. It could always be omitted. It's not, it's not a traffic control component. It's more of a novelty that was kind of added through the discussion process, that it would be nice to have a little bit more parking there. Actually, I believe it was a comment from Mr. Murphy. Just, not that it was absolutely needed, but, it was kind of an afterthought that we said it made sense.
Just so I can be clear, I'm looking at the very first page where it's the trip generation summary. I was thinking about how, because all these numbers, it looks like are based off the 150 apartment units, the residential units, and so I wanted to make sure that it wasn't like that didn't make it look better, but it looks like this is actually worse for traffic than if it was more or fewer residential units. Am I reading that right? It looks like the residential total is higher than the office and retail.
Correct.
So in theory, if you were converting some of those units to either office or retail space, it would actually generate fewer trips.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the residentials, it's kind of a peak hour trip. Some of the commercial would be more of a, all day long kind of thing. It depends, depending on the uses. But, office obviously has some peak hour trips, but they're a little bit later, somewhat delayed from the residential commute.
Okay.
This answers a lot of the questions I had before quite adequately, and we're still at the 2,286 number. This looks good to me.
Comments from board members? Jeff, planning department, have any comments or questions on the traffic?
No.
Was there anything else you wanted to touch on now before we open it up, see if there's public comments or questions?
No, thank you.
All right. Anybody here have any comments or questions, either from the applicant or the board? All right. Do we go through the draft decision and the considerations?
Well, I got a question.
Please, Harry.
How far back does your property go from the Ferry Street to the back? How far does that go back to the bike path and then it stops right there, or how far back does it go?
Goes to the bike path, sir.
All right, who's gonna own that land from the bike path going toward the river and the back of all that whole thing? Who owns that?
City does,
The city owns that?
yeah.
You plan on putting any kind of a fence back there of any kind to separate the bike path from your property, or you just leave it the way it is?
During the site visit with the Conservation Commission that was discussed, it has not been applied for, but we intend to submit a request for determination of applicability to allow us to do some vegetative clearing along the bank. If you're familiar with that bank between the mill and the bike path, and then there's that fence that's kind of the chain link fence that's dilapidated, hanging over, kind of falling apart. So we'd like to have that replaced as well.
Is there access, there is an access point to the bike path from the parking lot on tract 1 as well, right?
That's correct. There's an access point here.
That's gonna be, yeah.
And then
okay.
also back.
Right.
If you're going on your bike, you're probably gonna, from here, you probably you know, you probably go around the back and then go up that way.
Yep.
Because this is more of a, there's a grade change here with stairs.
Oh, with stairs, okay.
Yep.
All right. All right, so Jeff, we gotta make findings on, section 9 first, right?
Correct.
All right, so this is under the mixed-use mill industrial district. Established to achieve the following objectives of the city of Easthampton. A is to generate pride and confidence in the historic mill district. I think we could talk about this a lot, but I think that part of this is pretty remarkable, and the way we're preserving some of the structures, but also using that space in a more modern way is, I think, one of the best parts about this.
Okay.
To restore and revitalize the historic mill buildings in Easthampton, same thing. To maintain a consistently high level of design quality, I think we've gone through a lot of details here. I definitely think it's the plan presented is high quality.
May I just ask a quick question? So the board members have a draft for discussion here. If you do not read it, are you generally accepting the way, like, I mean, there are probably some grammar changes and some
Do you want me to
typos.
read the actual
I just wanted
answers in
to,
the draft?
it would just help me understand
Okay.
if you're comfortable with the nature
Alright.
of the finding.
So under generate pride and confidence in the historic mill district, we have the board finds that this project will support the completion of the mill district through the provision of a comprehensive revitalization of the historic mill complex. Under B, which is restore and revitalize the historic mill buildings in Easthampton, we have the board finds that the project will restore and revitalize the mill complex in substantial accordance with the 2002 Urban Rivers Visioning Plan, the city's 2008 Master Plan, and the 2016 Open Space and Recreation Plan. Maintaining a consistently high level of design quality, we have the board finds that the site and architectural drawings provided for the project will provide a high level of design and will be architecturally integrated into the site and its surroundings. D is to provide for a compatible mix of uses within the old mills. The board finds that this special permit will allow for a wide range of compatible uses to exist on the property, and that the minimum number of 75 units will provide an appropriate balance of mixed uses while providing necessary parking and traffic mitigation on and off-site. E requires that it improve the pedestrian environment in the mill districts, and F is to establish connections between the mill buildings and the abutting mill ponds. The proposed finding says the proposal includes at least 2 public access points for pedestrians adjacent to Lovefield Street and through the construction of a new connection from Ferry Street to the Manhan Rail Trail. The project is also supported by a $3.51 million MassWorks grant awarded in November 2018 to further enhance and upgrade pedestrian access to the site and to provide a multi-use path and public parking adjacent to Lower Mill Pond. The combination of the public infrastructure upgrades funded through MassWorks grant and the private development of the site will nearly complete the full vision of the Easthampton Mill District. G requires that it allow diversification of existing businesses. The proposed language says the approval allows significant leeway for the private development to accommodate additional commercial and mixed-use opportunities. The establishment of a minimum of 75 dwelling units on the property will ensure that the project remains mixed-use over time, but will ensure the long-term viability of the development and such that it can be dynamic. H requires that it provide incentives for new businesses. The proposed language says the proposal will provide for opportunities for new and unique commercial tenants to occupy newly constructed and renovated spaces within the mill district. Do you need me to read 903.1 and 904? Regarding compatible uses in the mill buildings and residential uses in existing mill buildings?
If you would,
Read the proposed finding?
yep.
So 9.031 says this approval provides for a blank permit and site plan approval to allow for changes in tenancy without requiring additional special permitting from the planning board. The planning board finds that uses currently listed in the table of uses in the zoning ordinance, last amended May 3rd, 2018, are deemed compatible, and the allowance to change uses based on market demand and owner selection has allowed existing mills in the vicinity to thrive and be highly diverse.
So that's just something I just want to, these are proposed, but I think that that's a concept that is generally understood to come out of these special permits. So I just wanted to make sure that you're comfortable with that notion.
I personally think it goes hand in hand with the flexibility on the number of residential units. I think it makes sense to give some flexibility with a floor so that we can make sure that I think if they eliminated all residential units, we would want them to come back and explain why and deal with the logistics of that. But 75 to 150, I think maintains that. I think the flexibility they're going to need to fill this out and make it succeed.
Concur.
9.04, regarding residential uses, proposed language says this approval provides for both a special permit and site plan approval to allow some residential uses to occur on the first floor of buildings previously used for industrial purposes. The board finds that allowing first floor residential will allow the full revitalization of the existing mill buildings in accordance with the purposes of this section, and that a significant portion of the foundation wall of buildings adjacent to the canal will remain and constitute an existing building for the purposes of this permit. Okay, moving along to the special permit criteria.
Not seeing a lot of typos so far. Well done, Jeff.
Yeah. And you had weeks and weeks to calmly draft this document, too. Number 1 requires conformance with the provisions of the ordinances of the City of Easthampton, the general laws of Massachusetts, and all applicable rules and regulations of state and federal agencies. The proposed finding is that all applicable regulations of the state and federal government shall apply and be met by this project, including but not limited to Building Code, Architectural Access Board, and Americans with Disabilities regulations. All future uses shall comply with other local regulations such as Board of Health and Licensing Board. Speak up if anybody has any language corrections or issues to discuss. Number 2 is protection of city amenities and abutting properties through the minimizing of any detrimental or offensive uses or destruction of unique, important, natural, scenic, or historic features on the site. Proposed finding is in support of the purpose to enhance and revitalize the existing mill complexes. The project includes a partnership with the city to upgrade and enhance public infrastructure in the vicinity. Said partnership is demonstrated in the award of a $3.51 million MassWorks grant to the city on November 2nd, 2018. The historic features of the site will be preserved to the extent possible, and a demolition permit has been filed with the Historic Commission. The City of Easthampton public safety officials fully support the renovation of the property, which will eliminate a decades-long public safety hazard created by the abandonment of the mill complex. Number 3 requires minimization of traffic and safety impacts of the proposed development on adjacent highways or roads and maximizes the convenience and safety of vehicular and pedestrian movement within the site. The proposal does not affect any unique natural or scenic features. Proposed findings says the project will include provisions to ensure vehicular movement within the site are suitable for a mix of residential and commercial uses. Pursuant to the city engineer's letter dated November 20, 2018, all related issues have been resolved through the project design, as indicated by the testimony of the Easthampton Fire Chief David Motter on October 30th, 2018. The internal drives have been reviewed and approved by the Easthampton Fire Department, and the site plan design is a significant improvement to life safety and emergency services. As indicated in the city's application for MassWorks, the proposal not only includes suitable pedestrian access within and from the site, the project includes as an integral component a new public access way from Ferry Street to the Manhan Rail Trail. The project is supported by a public-private partnership with the city to fund the upgrade of the existing intersection at Pleasant Street and Ferry Street with a roundabout, enhanced pedestrian crossings at the Manhan Rail Trail, and other public infrastructure improvements adjacent to the project site. I think we discussed all of that. I think the traffic and parking have been addressed.
Need to take a break for some air?
No, I'm good here. Plow right through. Number 4 is adequacy of the methods of disposal of sewage and refuse and the drainage of surface and subsurface water and adequate means of protecting wetlands, watersheds, aquifers, and well areas. The applicant has obtained an order of conditions and a stormwater management permit from the Easthampton Conservation Commission, which will ensure that the adjacent wetlands, canal, and surface and subsurface drainage will comply with local and state regulations. 5 requires mitigation of adverse impacts on the city's resources, including the effect on the city's water supply and distribution system, sewage collection and treatment systems, fire protection, and streets. The proposed finding says the project includes an upgrade to public water, sewer, and electric infrastructure on and adjacent to the site. Some of the public infrastructure upgrades are included in the MassWorks grant in support of the project. Number 6 requires provision for the off-street loading and unloading of vehicles incidental to the normal operation of the establishment, parking, lighting, and internal traffic control. Proposed findings as pursuant to the applicant's calculations dated November 19th, 2018. The project will include enough parking to accommodate the anticipated mix of uses on the property. 7 requires the applicant's efforts to integrate the development into existing landscape through design features such as vegetative buffers and retention of open space or agricultural land. The proposed findings says the project includes a new connection to the Manhan Rail Trail, which, along with the off-site public infrastructure upgrades, will significantly provide and integrate public access across the project site. The mixed-use nature of the development will ensure that site contains a range of uses that may be accessed by the public for goods and services. 8 requires minimization of the area over which existing vegetation is to be removed. Proposed finding says where tree removal is required, special attention is to be given to the planting of replacement trees.
Actually,
So
that's
that's
it.
the requirement,
Yep,
okay.
yep.
We're missing some italics in
got it.
places. Proposed finding starts and says, "The site is a former mill complex with minimal vegetation remaining. Where vegetation does or will exist, it will be landscaped and appropriately maintained. The applicant's proposal includes long-term plans to maintain and/or support the maintenance of existing vegetated areas adjacent to the project site." Number 9 requires the consistency of the development with respect to setback, area, placement of parking, architectural style, and landscaping of the surrounding buildings and development. Proposed finding says the site plans and overall development plan provide for a compatible layout, design, and overall mixed-use development on the property. The revitalization of the property and the associated public infrastructure upgrades adjacent thereto are directly in line with long-term visions and planning for the city's mill district, specifically as outlined in the 2002 Urban Rivers Plan. Number 10 requires adequacy of the measures to prevent pollution of surface or groundwater, to minimize erosion and sedimentation, and to minimize changes in groundwater levels, increased runoff, and potential for flooding. The proposed finding says the order of conditions issued by the Conservation Commission ensures that proper measures and actions will be taken to prevent erosion and runoff during and after construction. Finally, number 11 requires adequacy of the methods to ensure that the use will not constitute a nuisance by reason of unacceptable levels of air or water pollution, excessive noise, or visually flagrant structures and accessories. Proposed finding says the overall use of the property as a mixed-use development will not result in any unacceptable pollution or flagrant nuisances and is normal and expected within the mill industrial zoning district. So, any objections with that?
I just could make a comment on that.
Please.
So, that number 11, so that they're back in the city property, in the back part of this, there's a sewer treatment plant. And that's one of the things that we're gonna need to talk about in the future with this, is to be able to control the smell coming from that facility.
Okay.
I mentioned it last year to DPW, get closer. You know, it's coming, not coming from the buildings, it's coming from.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That'll be fun.
That won't be on our plate, I don't think, but.
No.
All right, and so then there's some proposed conditions here. Number 1 is the size and location of buildings shall be substantially in accordance with the site and architectural plans approved as part of the special permit, subject to the following. A, minor changes in the project involving minor utility or building orientation adjustments or minor adjustments to parking or other site details that do not affect the overall build-out or building envelope of the site may be approved administratively by the building commissioner. B, a reduction of the number of dwelling units greater than 50% based on the initial proposal of 152 dwelling units shall require a new application for special permit and/or modification pursuant to section 12.7. So that's what we talked about before. As long as you stay above that 50%, you don't need a modification. 2, the buildings or portions thereof shown on the plans may change uses within the same section of the table of uses allowed by right or by special permit pursuant to the zoning ordinance last revised on March 31st, 2018. E.g., retail and services uses may change tenancy to other retail and services uses without review by the planning board.
So I think just to clarify, so that was I had this in draft form for some other versions, I would guess. What I would strike is in the buildings or portions thereof shown on the plans may change uses within, and strike the same section, so it's within the table of uses.
To allow for that conversion from residential to retail or something like that.
Right, and because what we're doing with the blanket is some of the uses require a special permit, some require site plan approval, and this is intended to be as clear as possible that those uses can be interchanged, and really the cap is a total reduction of units to below 50%. That's the real, that's sort of the first threshold. And
So
then
instead of may change uses within the same section of the table of uses, it's may change uses of the table of uses.
Yeah, pretty much. You may change uses within the table of uses.
Table of
It's
uses.
Within the table of
Yeah.
uses.
It's a little wonky, but
And then maybe cross out the EG part.
sure. I don't think. Yeah, again, it's kind of a hodgepodge here. So
So the idea of this is that it allows flexibility in the change of uses, with the only limitation being you need to keep half of the proposed dwelling units or more.
right, and then uses that are not currently in the table of uses would potentially require permitting. So if you think
Right.
of like a marijuana cafe, which we don't currently allow in the zoning, if that gets enacted into the zoning, then that doesn't fit within this use kind of
Which is
realm.
how INSA ended up here, right, even though
Yep.
there was a similar permit
Right.
for that building.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. 3, the spaces constructed on the west side of the property on city land shall be the subject of reciprocal easement to allow for parking by on-site uses, but which do not unreasonably restrict parking for public use, except that public parking overnight may be prohibited. Now, it sounded to me like there were also spots on the second, I guess, tract 2, that were also gonna be subject to a reciprocal easement, is that right?
Correct.
But that's subject to the MassWorks grant, and it's not.
No, they're both the east and west side are reciprocal easement agreements,
Mhm.
and they both are impacted by MassWorks.
Okay,
So there'll be, the reciprocal easement agreement will show an easement plan, and it'll show both those areas.
okay. So the ones that we've identified here are the ones that are city land, so that's like a little bit different than the ones on the other side are actually on your property, is that right? But because of the MassWorks grant, there's a little bit of a give there.
That's correct.
So, I think we probably leave this as is, and MassWorks sort of enforces and codifies that easement on the other side. Does that make sense, Jeff?
Yeah, yeah.
It wouldn't be MassWorks, it would be a reciprocal easement agreement that would be between us.
But the MassWorks program is the one that's gonna sort of obligate that agreement being signed, right?
Correct. Correct.
So they'll be the ones that sort of, make sure that that document gets,
Yeah, I think their legal team, if I remember last time, we drafted it, and
Yep.
they just approved it.
okay. All right, so,
The reciprocal easement gets signed off by the city of
By the
Easthampton
city.
and the developer, and then
Right.
it's submitted to MassWorks, so,
Right.
right.
do you think we need to mention that in here, or are you comfortable
east-
just using?
The east side, you mean?
I mean, I think that what our understanding is that through the public funding, a reciprocal easement is going to be required. And
Yep.
so the terms of that easement are gonna be worked out through the city and the developer. It's just that, I guess in this particular condition, it's intended to show that strip of spaces within the property, but on city land, to be particular about that. I think
Okay.
that was the intent of this.
I think your instinct is right, we can leave it.
Okay,
Unless it's removed and it's just lumped in with all the other reciprocal easement discussions that we're gonna have subsequent to
They're
this.
equal, you know what I mean?
Right.
So, it's however you think you wanna put it in there, it's gonna be.
It'll be handled either way. If you leave
Right.
it in, it's not a problem. If you take it out, it's gonna be handled as part of the
yeah,
reciprocal easement agreement.
let's just leave this in here as it's written, because I do think it carves out this city land component, but I think that through the MassWorks program, they're both gonna get covered anyway, so. I'm okay with that. Number 4, all construction shall comply with applicable state and federal regulations, including but not limited to the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. Number 5, the project shall be in compliance with the Conservation Commission's order of conditions and stormwater permit issued on November 19th, 2018. Any questions or comments from the board regarding the findings or conditions?
Well read.
Any questions or comments from the public regarding the draft proposal and, of findings and conditions?
I'd just like to say that Massachusetts does not follow the laws of the ADA. Protection access to its own CMR.
Okay,
So if it's going to be in Massachusetts, we can probably say that it's 521C.
So condition 4, you're saying including but not limited to the ADA, and you're suggesting we reference the CMR instead.
Massachusetts.
That's fine.
any other comments or questions from the applicant about the findings or conditions? Any issues? All seems okay. All right,
Motion?
yeah, I don't think you need to read it all again, though.
Thank goodness. I motion to approve the special permit and site plan approval for One Industrial Lofts LLC with the aforementioned conditions.
Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining. All right,
Great.
Congratulations.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
hard work's done.
Thank you very much.
Jeff, good job, by the way, doing that an hour
Yep.
before.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks a lot for that.
Thank you, Jeff, for all your help.
Yep.
All right, so we actually have a brief window
Thank
here.
you.
Yeah, till 7:30, yeah.
By 20
Yeah.
minutes.
Thank you
So-
all very much. This was arduous, and I'm still in awe of why any of you would stay on the board, although I am eternally grateful for the time and work.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank
Nice
you.
job, Lindsay. Hung in there.
Well,
Very nice
let's not say
work.
thank you.
We're gonna come back.
Okay, how you
have
doing?
until-
Maybe you should
have a few
look
minutes
and
until
see
that
who's
one
responsible
starts.
for the
Okay.
buildings that are in the back there, because if you get some kids that are playing around back and they get hurt, it's gonna be suing the city.
We've already, I mean, the fire and police have been back there numerous times, and, yeah, no, and you know,
It's a continuous problem.
we go on, I went on once, both fire and police go on YouTube, and if you Google YouTube 1 Ferry Street, Easthampton, Mass., the kids film all the crazy stuff they do inside, and then they look at who's there, kid-wise, and kind of, you know, and time of day. But it's cat and mouse, like, you know, I mean, you walk in and you say, hey, you, and grab them, and then
If I was a kid, I'd be playing down there.
it's really cool. I mean, come on, yeah. It's awesome.
Breaking windows and doing all kinds of stuff.
It's very scary though.
Reason why a lot of
Yeah,
people
I've not been in any of the buildings. I did a part of the walk with the fire chief just to like point out, you know, the issues to write this letter, and the buildings look so neat to look in the window. I would not go in. I was like, oh my gosh.
But that's what I mean.
This is gonna be so
part of
cool
it.
when
I
it's
think
all
the
done. It's
reason,
gonna be
one of the
unbelievable.
reasons
It is.
why there's less
And
space is because
again,
people have actually just wanted
you know,
how hard it
the
is
thoughtful
to get here.
process, yet the process that you guys have gone through, that's very mindful of the timing of these grants. You know, can't be stated enough. We'll go, Mr. Michon and I will have calls on Friday to go after some housing money for housing units across. And we can tackle them. Oh, yeah, and Friday.
So I missed some parts at the beginning because I thought it was not supposed to
Mass housing. So these two hurdles going forward and then knowing what they need to do in the conditions is huge, because we can talk about.
But I think it's fine. We can go through it.
Right.
My pleasure.
You're the best.
But yeah, really, I
I had to do
know.
my public reading skills proud today. My old elementary school teacher.
That's a lot. Wow, I don't remember having to read that much on ZBA.
I came to
I'll see
see the
tomorrow.
paper, so I couldn't.
How you feeling?
That's what happened. I couldn't find-
Good.
Yeah, feel good. How do you feel? Good.
I do. I feel good. I feel very good. I was not nauseous but worried. Said my piece, grabbed a piece of cake, and ran back here. And I said, I'm going to eat cake if it goes
You're
well.
guilty of
And
my
my
job.
dogs will get the cake. So I get cake. I'm going to have tea and cake for supper.
I went right by the
Have a good night.
Oh, yeah, I was just down there at the police court last week. Oh, yeah.
Well, they sort of put my eyes back in the
Yeah.
And we got another 17 minutes before we start the next one.
Yeah, we gotta tighten up our windows on these, Jeff.
I think we should stop posting hard times and just, it's the second item on the planning board's agenda, and be here or be square. That's how we used to do it.
See if you change your mind on December 4th
I,
for that approach.
Was that a
I
dig
definitely won't
towards,
change because what's going to happen is if this meeting, say for instance, had caused more consternation and debate than it did, and we went straight to 8:30 with this meeting, we'd have gone straight to 8:30 before giving up, and then those people would have said, waited for an hour. We've done it before. That's, yeah, I agree.
No, everybody has its
We're
problem.
better get them.
Shouldn't post a solid time.
I've been playing my trumpet about an hour and a half a day now, every day again for about 100 a month.
That's excellent.
I'm playing Carnival of Venice, stuff like that. That's got about 7 different variations. I don't know if you know anything about music.
I do. What kind of trumpet do you play?
About Hutchinson. I knew about it a couple of years ago. So I start up again.
That's why your wife is walking out on the street.
I got an old con at home. I always look for new trumpets. I look on Yamaha and Black.
Thank you again all. Happy Thanksgiving.
Good luck,
Have a
guys.
good day.
You
Thanks.
too.
We look forward to visiting when it's done.
Absolutely.
Yeah? You heard about that
So I
too?
look at my sheet music the other day, I'm like this. Looking down like at the sheet music on a thing.
Oh, boy, you
I'm
need a
like,
projector or something.
I wasn't.
Braille.
I can see the notes, but they're like,
This
I
one.
can probably play a harmony, they can, you know what I mean? One note's above the other.
Yeah.
You know what's really good for that is YouTube.
Oh, I go on YouTube all the time.
That's a great way to.
Oh,
find
Unfortunately, we don't
tomorrow.
finish
I
in
go
time.
on there, well, I get all my sheet music.
Like,
You know,
where there's
any
wetlands.
song you want. Press Prado,
Approve the
stuff
aid.
place.
Couldn't finish last night, so they come Monday, so we're gonna talk about special meeting.
Yeah, there's true.
Follow theirs.
Tried to warn
So
you.
finish it.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, yeah, he plays really well.
Oh,
Yeah, that would be.
He does.
Whoop.
I heard
coming
that.
Not to blow
from
his own horn.
one who knows, who
I get
listens.
to listen to it every day,
Yeah.
but he does a good job. I just heard on the radio that INSA got their marijuana approved by the state today.
That's
Oh,
good.
it did happen.
Yep,
today. Very
yep,
good.
I just heard it on the radio, so. I should-
That's good.
I'm studying up my recipes.
You're gonna cook them up?
Not tonight.
I want some brownies.
Pretty busy today, but
Yeah,
I've been scrolling
right,
through it, like every other.
Nope.
I know mine.
Well, some
Remember when I
with
was in
and
high
without
school-
nuts.
When I was in high school band, and when we played at the small school basketball tournament up in UMass.
Yeah.
And this kid from Agawam or something, he played Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White.
Okay.
You know, in that auditorium on that horn, and he was good.
He let it
This
rip.
kid was real good. Real good.
Both my boys are in bands. I play, my father plays, my grandfather played with Oscar Peterson. My dad got active duty in Vietnam by joining the Army band, so he
Nice.
toured. They're both really good pianists.
So what do you play for? What do you play for instrument?
Piano, guitar, a little bit of trombone way back when, but not much.
I was thinking of buying a keyboard, believe it or not. I love Boogie Woogie. I turn it on
Yeah,
YouTube
that's
all the
my
time, and
main
I
thing.
watch him play. And you got that crazy Bloom, a guy named Bloom.
I'm not familiar.
Oh, he look at Boogie Woogie and see this guy, kind of big. You know.
Oh, he's real big.
Oh, is that guy good? And a lot of these guys are from Sweden and they're not even from the
they're
United
They're
States.
from foreign countries.
Yeah, they're from Finland and Norway.
Yeah.
I love the Boogie Woogie.
Oh, I watch that all the time.
So my dad taught me.
Oh, there's a couple of guys that are really good. I mean, real good.
But you're the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy.
Yeah, I can play that. I can play that.
Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy.
I like playing like the Star Spangled Banner,
Yes,
you know, stuff like that. I like playing the William Tell Overture.
So you're doing some great stuff.
good.
Not that easy. Well, the Carnival of Venice, I get through about 3 different variations, and it's just, okay, I did that.
You'd make a great grandfather. You could wake up the whole house in the morning with reveille, you know.
That's right.
Yeah.
I used to, when I was in high school, I used to play military funerals.
Oh, yeah?
I got $5 every time I went to a funeral. They'd pick me up at high school, they'd bring me down to the cemetery,
taps?
and I'd play the taps, and then they'd bring me back. One day I went down with like 20 below zero, down at a pond down here. I think I got like 3 notes out, and that was it. It was so cold, I'll never forget that. Oh man, it felt so bad for that.
I did.
Okay, is the mic, is everything on? Recording?
Yes.
I noticed your voice echoed really well.
Oh, in here?
Yes. I
Are
had
they-
to choose my adjectives carefully.
Okay.
I'm not hearing mine, but it could
I
be.
didn't hear it from Jeff this time either. It was real bad with Chris's mic last time. Maybe that's why he didn't.
It's active.
Maybe that's why he skipped tonight's meeting.
Is that working?
I emailed him and I didn't get a response, so I don't know. It's
No,
uncharacteristic.
it's working.
It's just as well now that we got the vote, and I was looking through the whole thing. I'm like, he's gonna come in the middle, and we're gonna have to deal with that. But
You know what happened to Mr. Cockshot tonight?
That's what we were just talking about. I don't know. I didn't hear from him.
He's got a great looking lawn before it snowed. He lives right down the street from me, you know, so I went by there, there's not a leaf in it, really nice.
all mine are covered with snow now. Looks great.
I love it.
I
I
can't hit
definitely,
balls.
I definitely thought about running home the day before it was going to snow and fixing the leaves, but that did not happen. So
Yeah.
That did happen for me. I took a half day for
you
it.
did? Good for
Yeah.
you. I wanted to really bad, but
But unfortunately, the leaves were so wet, the attachment on the back of the mower was just not working. So I had to just mow everything with the finest
Oh,
leaf
yeah.
that I could get it to. And live
I
with
got a
it.
great system for mulching leaves in my lawnmower. I got a great system.
um,
I put a Brown motor on my hair. It's 20 horsepower mower.
are you roped in? Okay.
It's like a hot rod lawnmower.
Yeah, I need to
Did
upgrade.
anyone, did Alan talk to you about like a schedule for these types
My
of
father
meetings at
played
all? No.
banjo.
Usually work?
Played the
Did
trumpet.
they talk about?
He played the
They
piano.
said that it would be a
Banjo, I love playing
And my
banjo.
mother played the cornet.
Okay.
So you got music in
What
your
do you think?
family.
Yeah, oh.
Like
I
once
still
or
got my
twice a
father's
month.
banjo at home. He's
And they
got
feel
a
like
Vegas
twice a
silver
week,
bell
good
banjo.
expectations
those
for
are
that.
nice.
That's really cool.
That
You ever
turns
pick it up?
out, those are like,
can't.
it's almost like a barrel. Brings out
Do you
the
have,
low
do you
tone.
typically have some possibility at night?
Yeah.
That's very cool. Get together and play sometime.
Who's that?
And
What's that
we were
show that that
based
guy, the lawyer, plays the banjo?
in Springfield?
Matlock.
Gosh, I haven't seen that.
Goes
I was gonna
around
say,
and
there's a
he-
blast from the past.
He goes around and he plays all the old country
Yeah.
songs.
An opportunity or something?
Right.
Or?
Together with
Sandy and
If he and I
Mama,
would play,
Mama.
he just got a
I
new
used to watch that
keyboard.
Hee-Haw all the time. It's a great.
Oh, hee-haw, that's
That's
a
great
flash
musicians
from
on
the
that.
past.
Do you live in town?
You get that.
Yeah, that, you can
short
tell by
big
his
barrel
head
guitar.
that that's a flash.
He was good.
Yeah, yeah.
Hee-haw.
You have kids or anything?
I like Doc Severinsen.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
okay,
Al
you went,
Hurt.
you're up, yeah.
Al Hurt was a lot of his records.
You know what it means to
Right.
leave New
It
Orleans?
must be
one of my
nice,
favorite
yes.
songs.
I have to admit, I don't know that one.
Yeah, that's
Gets a
hectic.
little tight, but.
Al Hurt, do you know what it
I have
means?
a
to leave New
7-year-old
Orleans?
daughter and
It's
a
just
4-year-old daughter.
Oh,
So I'm
yeah.
on like
You
on
got
the other
a
side
couple-
You're on
of
the
that
other
spectrum.
side. Two young girls and they have
All
to
You should be able to pick it
Yeah.
up on your computer.
Everyone's looking at me and being like,
Pick
yeah.
up Al Hurt there and you can.
Everyone's,
Some
yeah,
of
everyone's looking at
them
me
are
and they're
free,
like,
some of
we have a
them
lot of friends
you
with
pay
boys and they're
for
like,
the
Told me to
you have
look
it easy.
for was
And I'm like, yes, that's what
First
I'm
guy
told, but I'm
said,
also told that I'm gonna
That's
be.
cool.
no, with
In
someone
big
else.
trouble.
I think it
Someone to
reversed
look
it.
for on
I've
this.
heard a lot of reversal, because I've been
Oh,
told
well.
I have easy.
There's about 3 or 4, but I was following.
Yeah, what
Okay.
names
That's
were?
There's one guy
It's
that
some
does nothing but
kind of
smooth stuff.
blessing.
He plays,
That's fine.
Teenage boys aren't less smooth even.
something about the fun.
It's fun, it's fun.
Just all, it's all real smooth.
Well, you got, you know,
Bobby, what's the amount of song that we call it song that Bobby Vinton sang? Roses are red, violets are blue, you know, stuff like that.
This next one will be
You guys are helping me.
some more typing
Yeah.
than referring to like
You're getting me through
documents,
this. I'm
but
ready for it.
the best we can do will be, like I said before,
yeah,
helpful.
that was
This
one
is
that Bobby Vinton sang. You gotta
what
look
the,
that
what
one up.
Jesse
That
did
one
with
was
the
right.
other ones. I
That
drafted a
probably
bunch of
will
stuff,
bring,
so I'm hoping
Benton, that's the
Maybe-
one.
we get to the
maybe-
point where you can read through this.
Would
And so
probably
if we do that, you can just
bring a tear
note
to
that
your
this-
eye.
Roses are red,
whatever, you can call it
violets are
something, it's just red into the record, because
That is a
that'll save a
million-
lot of typing.
Yeah.
But I like, Al Hurt,
I just wanna make sure I capture what you need me to.
some of the stuff that he plays, instead of just playing it straight,
And then this will come up, so that's
he gets like
supposed to be
into a
stable.
key, and he'll back himself out of the key. You
Yeah.
know what I'm
Whatever's
talking
not
about?
in
In other words,
here.
he'll start
Pretty
playing
much, that's a
something.
good, yeah, it's a
He'll
fair
get
assessment.
into a note that's above, you know, where it's supposed to be, and then he'll just work his way down, and he just, the song
Folds
sounds
it
so
in.
confusing, you can't really tell what he's playing.
Sounds
you know?
like jazz to me.
Yes. It's like a bundle, like he scrabbled it.
Yep. But Doc Severinsen, I remember he was playing youth of it.
Doc Severson's another
Yeah,
one.
he was the head trumpeter for Johnny Carson.
Okay, well,
He ran Johnny Carson's band, and then that Tonight Show band.
I think I've seen that.
And every night he'd have a different outfit.
Yeah.
And his wife made his clothes for him.
Yeah, they were
Yeah,
That's very
handmade.
cool.
Yeah.
We're in recess, we finished the other one, right? Yes, yes. Right.
Tell us you can't be here.
I just got a looper recently for my guitar, and I've had effects boards forever, but the looper I am loving. It really is fun. You know, where you record a sequence of what you do, and then play it back, and then you can play over your own
play with
sequence.
yourself.
Oh,
Play
play
with
with
your own
yourself.
song?
That's
You're
it,
play- It is. It's like you're playing with yourself, yeah.
This guy.
That's two. Let's see if we
Well,
go
that's
for three.
not nice.
This guy gave me I got divorced back in 19.
You know we're on camera, just
71.
remember.
Right.
Anyway,
Oh, yeah, we're still
I
live.
took up guitar, okay? This guy that was something I golf
Live with
with,
Benny
he gave me
Goodman.
an old Silvertone guitar with a pickup, and I couldn't play one chord, but I knew melody because of my trumpet experience, and I could read the music. So when I found out where the notes were,
You're playing like a trumpet.
I'm playing melody on a guitar, but I couldn't play one lousy chord. I could play like Mary Had a Little Lamb,
Yeah.
on top of Old Smoky, you know.
Single pick on the string.
Yeah, stuff like that. I couldn't go very fast, but
Well, that's how it
sounded
was,
good.
How you start.
Wasn't Prince famous? Didn't he like do like 9 tracks on his albums? Like he would play every instrument on the whole
Every
album
single
for
thing.
himself.
I think I've heard that.
Yeah. That's what he would
But I
do.
love like guitar. I love like Johnny Winters, Stevie Ray Vaughan. I mean,
Oh, Ray
yeah.
Vaughan.
I
Ray
said-
Vaughan was really
I was
nice.
just-
Saw a
I
great
looked that
show.
Ray Vaughan, he
This
had,
weekend.
He was a
Marcus.
more of an
and
orchestra
Street, really great.
swaying.
It was
Stevie
kind of-
Ray's
it's a-
mom? Oh, he
They're
was in- he was
blues,
in
but with
that.
heavy
So-
jazz.
No, you got a different Ray.
Really
Bud.
good stuff.
Oh, you're thinking, I know what you're thinking, yeah, I know what you're
Yeah,
thinking.
Big group?
Yeah, he had a big band up in Canada.
Yeah.
They had a horn section, which was fantastic. The trumpet player was really good. Sax player was actually called the Marcus King Band. They just played at Pearl Street last weekend. Really good stuff. I think you'll like. It's blues, but with jazz and funk kind of mixed in.
I play like, what do you call it, the Canadian brass.
Canadian brass.
Yeah, they make some nice stuff too.
My boy,
You get
he
that
started.
Trumpeter's Holiday,
Yeah.
you know, try to play that.
Okay. My boy started, my eldest with the flute, and my youngest with the trombone, and they both seem to be switching to piano. About halfway through, they're moving to piano.
When I first got in the high school band, you know, from grade school, I went to high school band. The guy that impressed the living shit out of me, the first time I went to a rehearsal, was the kettle drum player. The drum section was right behind us. A guy named Mutter was playing this thing, okay? He's up there and it's going along, and all of a sudden he gets that, you know, whatever he had to do, he's got that thing, and he is just going for it. I'm going, holy shit, was that impressive?
You know what I'm impressed with is our music program here in Easthampton.
That's pretty awesome.
It is fantastic. Mr. Lennon,
I should get a couple of
especially.
my-
Well, here in Easthampton.
My kids
Yeah,
have played
that's-
at Berkeley
that's
every year
really
they've been in
good.
school. Every year since middle school. I mean, that's a lot of trips to Berkeley, and it's very influential. And they grade them with high difficulty, and it promoted their skill level. And they're really good players.
I started out, well, I had a trumpet at home. I had my mother's trumpet, and I had a cornet, a little cornet. And I played in the Maple Street junior high band.
When it was already an old school.
Yeah, it was old back then. You're gonna tear it down back in 1940, 48, or whatever it was.
It was already 60 years old.
They were complaining about it.
Yeah, they're gonna get condo out of it back then. So anyway, I left there, and then I went to high school.
See what you do, Harry, you don't mention the year. You say it was back then, that's all.
Well, I had this guy on eBay,
Back
and
in
I got my
48.
number on eBay, Schumann 1943, okay, so I buy a lot of copies. This guy comes back and says, "Boy, I hope that's not when you were born." I'm going, what the hell's that guy doing? What am I doing, checking at the local cemetery, because I'm, you know,
No,
75?
don't give up.
So it is a year that you were born.
Yeah.
More documents.
Is it almost time now?
Yeah, we're getting that little app that's still rolling in
Boy,
too.
you got color.
Oh, you change it again? You know what they're doing here?
It looks like
I got
it.
one side now, we got a side
Just said that, we'll have an extra one.
Yeah,
I think it's got more of the planting stuff on it.
Do you do any other boards?
No, I wasn't supposed to start until Monday.
Ah.
So
You came early for
I
us?
came in
Oh,
for
you're
you
the
guys.
best. Thank
to
you.
help out.
Tossed you right into the deep end of the pool.
Well, this is the best of all the boards. So.
Agreed.
Yeah,
don't say a word. Just
should be.
keep smiling.
You should be entertained.
Sit, smile, type.
Right.
Yeah.
For entertainment purposes only, you know?
That is an awesome job description. Sit, smile, type. Just love it.
We gotta be getting close. How long is the minute? Oh, 7:30.
Okay, 7:30.
Jeff, you ready?
Is it 7:30?
Verizon
Yes,
time.
that meant no.
So, yeah, I'm ready for you to wait one more minute.
Jimmy, did you ever hear of the Arbenz book?
No, I have not.
Are you guys still waiting for anybody, or are you?
If you can play the Arbenz
Okay.
book, the front and the back covers about this thick, you'd be a professional trumpet.
Okay, we're ready.
All right, I'm ready to do this. So often, there's one other component besides the system. I have to read things back, so be prepared for this.
Yeah.
We'll give you a break on that tonight.
He's better at that.
Being roped in here.
All right, let's get started. Moving on to our next item. Continued public hearing for Easthampton Park Solar 1 LLC, seeking a special permit under section 12.7 And 7.3 for construction of a large-scale solar facility at 232 Park Street. Welcome back.
All right, thank you. My colleague has the easel. So
Okay.
I'll just hold it in front.
All right.
But yeah, so I'm Rob Bukowski with AMEC. We're a consultant for Soltage, and Steve Rutherford is here for Soltage. So I know you haven't seen me personally here before, but Drew, my colleague's been to most of these meetings. So,
Yep.
just picking up for him, he's heading out to New York for Thanksgiving. So just to give you an update, we had another meeting last night with the Conservation Commission, and they continue to next Monday for a special meeting. There's just a couple other outstanding stormwater issues that they wanted to take care of. So GZA, who is another consultant, did a third-party peer review of our stormwater, and they've been good. We've been working back and forth with them to address these comments. So really, I'd say we're probably 98% there. Just a couple other items that they want to take care of. This is Steve Herzog. He brought the easel.
There you go.
I definitely need a recap on the timing, because if my memory serves right, we're right up against your timing of now.
Yes, we are. So, so thank you. So the SMART program, which is the incentive program in Massachusetts, that opens next week. So in order for Soltage to basically to have a viable project, they need all non-ministerial permits in hand, along with their interconnection agreement, which they've had for a while. So, yeah, once the program opens, they've got to get these in. So we are really right up against it. So, the hope
They're
is
meeting next Monday, you said?
next Monday night. So the hope is that we'll get that final approval there. We're obviously here hopeful that we'll get approval from the planning board tonight. And if we get approval from Conservation Commission on Monday and they sign the order of conditions, that Soldiers will be able to register, right away, as early as possible next week.
We've been waiting for the
Yeah,
Concom.
I mean, so we can address this later. We can do it now, I guess. We're tasked as part of this process with evaluating the stormwater plan, and so that's typically something that we defer and wait for Concom to handle. What we can do is we can hold a special meeting next Tuesday night again, and hopefully, assuming we can iron everything out here, we would be able to. I think we can go through a draft decision tonight, so that Tuesday night next week when we vote on it, Wednesday you can have a signed decision in hand. And so I don't think we can vote tonight, but that's what we can do to sort of make sure that you still get it within your window. So hopefully that's still good enough for you guys to meet your deadlines.
So it's a special meeting for us, too.
Yeah, no, I certainly appreciate you willing to do that. I guess the only question I'd ask, and Jeff was kind enough to send his conditions for the permit.
Yep.
And I know one of the conditions in there says that if you approve it, that it's conditioned upon receiving an order of condition from the Conservation Commission. So with that condition in there,
Well,
it's really.
I would clarify that the way that at least this document, which is basically dated today, the condition would be that the project shall be in compliance with the order of conditions dated, and that's what we just went through another project where the planning board kind of also waited and deferred to that. So it's a safeguard for the planning board to say that it shall be in accordance with those orders, rather than will be in compliance with some subsequent order issued, presumably on Monday. So
It's really not. It's not something we can do before Concom. I suppose if someone had asked us to, then we could have changed how we do things, but we really need to wait for them to provide the analysis on that. So,
But we can go the day after.
we can have it so that when you get your decision from them on Monday, we can meet Tuesday and get you something Wednesday in hand. So hopefully that'll help.
Yeah, we was hoping to get that, conditional.
Yeah, we can't really do a conditional special permit like that. We really, that's tasked to us to handle, so we really need to know that it's been ironed out by them before we can give it the final vote. But like I said, if we can get everything else ironed out tonight, then hopefully we can do it quickly on Tuesday and get that right to you.
You said they're ready next week. We're saying Tuesday. Where in next week?
Well, I'm not an expert certainly on the SMART program, and I've never registered a project through any of the previous SREC or SREC versions, or SREC or SREC 2. But my understanding is the sooner you get it in, the better chance you have of securing your place in the first block, which is really what makes the project financially feasible.
So you wanted to get it in Tuesday when you walked into this room tonight. And
Correct.
now it's looking like Wednesday.
Right.
Yes, I mean, I think what we can do is, and Jeff can, expedite, like I said, I mean, if we go through this decision tonight, it'll really be a matter of making sure that we don't make any last-minute changes, and then we can just sign off on it then. You can have it Wednesday morning. But I think that's the soonest we can do it. I mean, through all this, we've sort of been waiting for Concom to get that last step done, and there's not much we can do about it on our end at that point.
Yeah, no, understood. And we've I know you haven't been in attendance to any of the Conservation Commission meetings, but they brought a third-party reviewer in
Yep.
sort of late in the game, and that's really caused some of the delays, which we've been working through, and Salter's more than willing to meet all of GZA's requirements and comments, and we have worked through those. So we're confident that these will be addressed, and we'll have everything in hand Monday.
Okay, great. All right, so I guess we can move on to some of the last outstanding issues that we have here. Do you want to walk us through some of the stuff that's happened since you guys were last here? Or
Sure.
how do you want to handle this? Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if you want to start with the easement
Sure.
For the trail. So
Sure.
hopefully you've received a copy of the letter
Yep.
from the landowner. Yeah. So he's willing to grant access for an easement through there for a walking trail. One of the things that we're still going to prepare, and I know this was one of the conditions of the approval, and once it's approved, is putting an actual easement plan together. So it'll be a survey plan signed and sealed by a Mass Registered Land Surveyor that has the meets and bounds and shows exactly where that easement is.
Excellent.
In that area of the easement, we're adjusting the road a little bit, and that was one of the comments from GZA. Rather than have the road next to one of the basins, one of the stormwater basins, they wanted to move it a little bit closer to the array itself so that there's a grass strip between the road and the basin.
Okay.
So I think that's pretty much it for the easement.
All right.
Can you
Well,
just because it's related to, so I think that, I have been reviewing the project with the conservation agent, but that was a question that came up last night, from what I understand. So if we're looking at page 2 of the plan set that's before you, is it the top drainage? Yeah. If you will articulate where you think that road will move.
I can show you on that.
It's a paper cut just waiting to happen.
Yeah, I should have worn gloves. Yeah, so actually this plan here, we were able to make these modifications today. So this plan shows the road, which is kind of pulled down towards the southwest, closer to the edge of the array, which allows a little bit more of a grass filter or grassy area between the road itself and the basin. So the easement, the idea was that it would come up through here, and then Steve could point out exactly where there's a walking path or a jogging path that's removed.
Okay, there's 11 lines here.
Yep.
There's an existing path that runs towards the city's well house.
Okay, yeah.
That path's right here, goes over to Nonotuck Park. So the easement would join up with this path behind.
Okay, so it doesn't even have to track the road like we had originally talked about.
It might track part of it.
But it doesn't have to go along the whole road. You can cut right back into the path system that's already in there.
Yes. So approximately.
Yeah, that would go
Great.
toward-
The way that the fence is shown now, it encompasses that road. So,
Yep.
in order to provide security, we don't want
Right.
people obviously walking through the array area. So, yeah, there's room between this basin here.
So can I ask about that though? Because I think, in the last plan set, the fence was adjacent to the array and the road was outside of the fence. And I thought that was, in the previous discussion, that was an element of understanding in the easement that if that road is there, that road might be part of what could be traversed over.
Right.
So I'm just seeing this now. I would like to express a little bit of concern that now the fence goes up and encompasses the road, which means that it would not be potentially part of what could be traversed over there in the future. So that's something that I didn't pick up on and didn't have the plan until just now. So, like looking at the previous,
a negative?
I think it is a potential negative in that the previous discussion was that would enhance our ability to potentially use that dog leg at the end, and you know, if you are envisioning us really trying to implement a trail, that road would be in place and be part of what we would traverse over. So that was a conversation I had with Michael Zimmer about that.
And it is also on the, you know, sketch that the Gauls provided with their letter, it shows that roadway being part of it, part of the easement area.
There is a reason for that. The main part being that conservation wanted the road moved further, closer to the array, so that you'd have a green strip between here and these basins. So there's a little bit of conflicting issue there. That being said, the other issue is that by code, the fence can't be closer than 10 feet to the array. So it's not possible to take the fence and move it right against the road here.
Okay.
Because that you know, it wouldn't meet the electrical code. So, I mean, there's certainly, you know, something could probably be done here. I mean, this is just gonna be mowed grass, so there's nothing to prevent access through here.
And Jeff, I just want to check in on that again, just to make sure I'm fully understanding, because I'm still struggling to see the negative. But by having part of that trailhead already be cut as road, the benefit there is that anyone that is actually cutting the trailhead in has less work to do. I mean, that's the negative, right?
Yes, in that if you're envisioning this road is going to be well constructed and maintained, and that would be a huge asset to us, the city, if we were to work a trail through there.
As opposed to cutting a new one.
Yeah, I mean, my real pointed question is, you know, whether so we have not clarified any goals with this trail. I mean, it could be a path, you know, a single lane walking path, or it could be a, you know, 5 foot, 6 foot wide multi-use path. And I'd be concerned with build a multi-use path and tuck it in around the, you know, road and around the fence, and then be subject to, you know, encroaching on the drainage basin and wetlands. So that was where the first iteration was, we were really comfortable with that. So we're definitely in the ping pong game here of going back and forth between obviously the competing interests. So I just, for me, it's just a question about the fence. I mean, we've kind of articulated that we may need to move this to next week too, but that's just something new. I am verbally processing it.
Sure. And so I understand, like what Rob said, this has been moved around a little because of the commission's concerns with the erosion. I think there's plenty of physical room in there, physical space. It's just a matter of exactly where the fence will go with respect to the road and the easement.
How much space are we talking about in terms of the easement, like width-wise?
Well, I wasn't part of any discussions with Mike Zimmer, but did you have an expectation? I mean, my expectation would be 6 feet, just knowing run and walk on trails at a minimum.
Right. I mean, the way the draft easement was drawn was to give flexibility. I mean, this wasn't an easement just over a path, but just that area to work within. It's
okay.
There's just a little teasing apart here of what this actually means. I mean, the Exhibit A has been around for a little while, and so it encompassed the road. I think that was a clear objective, was to potentially have access to traverse that road.
Yeah, and again, if it was up to us, we'd be completely fine with Exhibit A, but this is something that was raised last night by Conservation. So we're trying to react to their concerns, knowing that, you know, we're right up against the deadline here. I don't know what else we could do, really. I mean, I don't think Soltage would be willing to allow access sort of through the fenced area if we wanted to actually get up into the road and then out. It's just not a safe practice. You know, and I don't think we want to talk about making another dirt or gravel road or paved road or anything like that, because there's one more thing that Conservation is going to raise next week when we talk to them about this. So, you know, we're kind of in a tough spot. I think the positive thing here is that the property owner is willing to allow this easement and that there is space. You know,
So in the scale, this looks like at least 20 feet from the fence to this detention basin, and 10 feet or so than that. If it's, and this could be adjusted, I suppose, a little bit, but there's at least 10 feet of space right there if we were outside of the fence.
Well, my other thought, I was trying to find the stuff we got from Piscomic, but I know there's a whole network of trails, and my recollection was we were trying to tie up with something that was on the north side of it there, so it made sense to go along the roadway and then jump off there, but there, and I don't know because I don't have the network map that they provided, but it sounds like there's another trail there that you've identified that might tie into easily.
Yeah. So, that's another point. The property boundaries, there's a pink line. The wetland is inside the property line. The easement could skirt the extreme eastern side of the property and still meet up with this existing trail.
Well, I think at the very least that the portion before you get to the roadway is at least land that's already going to be maintained by you. Obviously, the more of that space that you guys are already going to be clearing and maintaining, the better for the city, because it's something that we don't have to go. I mean, I assume that band along the side there is much like the stuff we walked through on our site visits and not easy to turn into a trail. So I think the more of it that's cleared and maintained that we can use is better. But
Yeah, I'm just trying to think that we have maybe
Yep.
different options.
Yep.
I think Soltage is willing, I mean, they've been willing at this point to try to bring this to this point.
yeah, and I appreciate it, especially because you were sort of in the middle of this, and it obviously wasn't your right to give when you guys went out, and I certainly appreciate that you've been able to get us this far. I think it's just a matter of figuring out
I agree with that.
how to make it work.
And it sounds like really you're willing to work it whichever way it's going to work. And if this is an issue between the Concom's issue and ours, I think that, you know, Jeff, have you been attending those meetings?
No.
So, I mean, we really don't have representation there to confirm this, or I think that's sort of a question, is we need to contact them and say, hey, you know, did you request this?
Oh, I'm sure they did. I mean, it's just, it doesn't achieve the same as the previous
Right.
plan. So it's concerning to me.
Personally, I don't see the concern. I mean, you have a portion of a gravel road that was part of it, but that's what, you know, less than 10% of the entire easement that people are gonna have to walk through. It's still gonna be maintained by Solden. It's just gonna be a grassed area.
Right, but the
outside of
easement
fence.
actually goes all the way around to the top there,
Right.
which is proposed to all the way up to where up to there.
Oh,
So
it goes, yeah.
it goes up around to where the road comes out, so that was the proposed stuff we had talked about. And
Right.
my recollection was that we were gonna go straight up from the top to tie into the trail network based on what Piscomic had showed us, but I don't have that with me.
Right, I can take it out. I mean, but this is a depiction of it. I mean, the beauty of the previous version was the ability to use the improved roadway,
Right.
Yeah.
and that seemed.
So it's not only an easement, but it's basically, we're using space that's already cleared and maintained by you folks.
Okay. When this easement was first envisioned, were you aware that the trail is a little bit more to the northeast? Like I was pointing out, the
Well, so that's what I was trying to find, is I think, Steve, there's several trails up there, and maybe they do all connect together. That's why I was trying to find the map that we got, because that part may end up being less important, if we can tie into the same network in an easy way, but, I don't know.
Well, I was part of the crew that delineated wetlands out here.
Yep.
So I know exactly where this boundary is and where this is. And this was a very easy walking trail here. Once you get heading towards the north, there's no more trail to the west of this.
Okay.
So the trail is this way,
So that is the connection.
up behind the park. Excuse me, towards
Yeah,
the
it goes towards
residential.
Natchitoches Park.
Yes, behind.
Yeah, it won't go that way, it will go straight, almost straight up.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess what we'll have to do is we'll have to wait. I
Two
mean,
or
we can
three
see what happens
trails
at
there.
Concom, and if that's what their
Both
final
the park.
order is, we'll
There's like,
figure that out.
Agreed.
holding my
Well,
fingers, but there's like three
they're not gonna
different
change their
trails.
mind, that's
Yeah.
pretty certain.
And they
You know, we've been
branch,
working
and they go,
very closely with them over
they
the
all
last
lead
few
towards
months,
the
so,
park.
they're not gonna change their mind and say, yeah, go ahead and put the road back.
I would hazard a guess that the electrical code prohibits chain link within 10 feet Does the electrical code allow for a different type of fence to be closer to an array? Wood?
I'm not an electrical guy, but I don't know where you put it. I mean,
Well, right now the
array
road is right there now. So you guys, so are there any restrictions on vehicular access being in any proximity to panels?
As long as there's a fence there on the outside to protect the array.
From people coming in. My sincere request is to find out if the electrical code provides any exemptions for different material fence. And I guess that I've seen agricultural fences, but I guess you're still stuck with the metal material to construct the fence. But
well, I mean,
there's coated metal
right.
fencing.
Yeah, no, and I don't know if you guys have thought of what type of chain link is being.
It's a security fence, whatever the most secure fence. What fence did you have in mind, Jeff?
In mind is any type of fence that may not conflict with the electrical code. I'm
So that you could
envisioning
put
metal hitting electric,
Right.
Producing items may be the problem, but if
It's fine. The fence is bonded. It's an
Right,
electric
but
fence is bonded.
apparently what we've been told is that the code is requiring that the fence be on the outside of the road because it
10
can't be
feet.
too close to the panels.
10 feet, yeah.
So if there's another material or another type of fencing that could go inside between the road and the panels, then the roadway could still be available for foot traffic under the easement.
Yeah, I don't, the 10-foot is my understanding of the code. Again,
Okay.
I'm not an electrical engineer or an electrician, so, just having done a lot of these solar projects, we typically offset the fence at least 10 feet from the outer edge of the array.
Right,
To
well, and
meet
I
the
think
code.
probably in most plans, it's not only not an issue, it's probably advantageous to actually put the roadway inside of the fence, then your roadway is secure. But this is a little bit different because we are working on getting an easement there, so I'm wondering if how much of that may be stuff that's sort of past practices and sort of traditional response.
Yeah, I mean, I don't subscribe because on the entire north side of the property, the road is not encased in the fence. So I don't see how, the road along the north is not enclosed in the fence. There's a crossing of the fence
Right
to
before it goes.
encapsulate the road on the other
Yep.
side. I mean, it's just, I'd really like to just explore this. I mean, the real purpose of the easement going over that tail end was to utilize the improvement
For foot traffic.
for
right?
foot traffic
Yeah.
that's already, we don't want to be constructing another path out there when you have a really perfect walking path already constructed.
Where is the access into the property from down here?
Yeah,
Generally, it's down there, yep.
So there's no road here.
right.
Correct.
So you're still gonna have to go up through, and if, Steve's saying that the running trails are
Well,
are in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I think that rerouting trail on the city property is not a challenge for us. It's getting access over this parcel.
There was certainly a desire to go straight north, go around basically along the roadway and exit the property due north and tie in there. And I don't know if there were issues with the existing trail or if there's other trail network up there. But I think that was certainly the intent, and that was what we've discussed in the past, and it seems to be what the Galls now are willing to grant as far as an easement. So I think what we would need is some sort of investigation and confirmation that you think that you can't put a fence on the inside of that road between the road and the panels. Not that you don't want to, or that that's not what you usually do, but that you actually can't, right? And if that's the case, then we'll have to figure out what we do. But it does seem like in other areas that the fence is going along by the panels and that the road is sort of outside of the fencing.
Yeah, the road, again, this all happened last night. right?
I
So the
understand, and I know
the road
you're-
got shifted because of that, otherwise we're completely fine with
Yep.
it. I get a little bit nervous as, Jeff, you're asking us to explore other options, and we're out of time.
Yeah.
And we're trying to meet everything the Conservation Commission does, and I feel like we have done that. We haven't said, no, we're not gonna do this, and we're trying to do whatever we can, but the bottom line is, if we don't get this resolved, there's no project.
Yeah.
Looking at this, and I agree, it's a great advantage to have that road, but looking at this, you can see these panels their corners actually touch the road. I mean, they're right up against it. And I mean, just logically looking at that, I have to say, where do you put a security panel? I mean, it looks like if you were to cram one in there, someone would be able to jostle the fence and hit the panels. I mean, is it that close?
It is, yes, it's right up against it, and, you know, in this part of the access road, it's only gonna be Salter, so it's into the right, most likely.
I
So-
feel like they've come a long way in making this happen, and I'd love to get that road. And, you know, if ComCon is willing to adjust, if you can find a way to get the road back, great. But if you can't, Jeff, I think, you know, beggars can't be choosers here.
Well, I mean, I really feel like we're not at the end point though here. I mean, we have another week that we can't vote until anyways, right? So I mean, I don't think that it's unreasonable to get some
But
confirmation.
where are they gonna put it?
I think that I'm not trying to be overly assertive. I think there's other options, and if it's
Moving the road?
nope, I think if it's slicing off a couple of those panels, I mean, it depends on how important. You know, it's all about what's important to who. I mean, I think we're at that
Well, and
point
also
right
I
now.
think Jeff's
It's all occurring. You know, this is in real time discussion.
about
so.
fencing material may have some legitimacy. I think that it's possible that you could do a wooden fence along that section that might not violate the electrical code. I don't think we've heard definitively about what the electrical code actually does require. And I think that, you know, it's not something that's gonna.
Doesn't the wooden fence create light blockage?
Because that wooden fence will put a breaking point in the fence has to be bonded. And it'll just interrupt the bonding of the fence. So, plus there'll be an issue of like security. If it's wooden and it's falling apart in 5-10 years from now, it won't be a secure fence. Whereas chain link fence is the more secure option. And it has to be bonded.
But I mean, none of this. I mean, this isn't like a prison. I mean, the chain link fences aren't going to keep someone out if they want to get in there. I mean, if we're talking about either vandalism or trespassing or whatever, I mean, it's not like there's security personnel on site or things like that.
I think you're right that changing the fence isn't going to solve it. I think the only viable thing that will actually get us that back is the ComCon agreeing, because they said no if what you're saying is true, and removing panels. Removing panels seems to be the only viable way to accomplish that goal. And I, for one, don't feel comfortable. I mean, yeah, you can modify it, and I see that you're all willing to ask for that, but I feel like we've asked for a lot, and you've really gone out of your way, not just with us, but with the neighbors and the plantings, and we've got a path here. I feel like I'm good.
May I ask
Yeah.
kind of a bigger picture question? With all due respect, is it the board's intention to have an easement as shown in this exhibit? Or is it the intention to have a trail that connects to the existing trail? Because they're not necessarily the same thing. You know, what this shows as an easement isn't the same as a trail connecting the south to the north.
Right.
So,
I mean, and that's where I think we're missing the information from the Pascomic Trust about the existing trails as well, which I think is another thing that we can gather more information on our end before the next meeting. But that was definitely the design that was designed, and it was. I don't have the documentation, so I can't recall exactly why or whether this could be a feasible workaround, but. I sort of agree with Jeff that, you know, and I understand this was on Concom's side where they changed this last minute, but, I mean, that was the plan, that was the design, that was the sketch, that's what we've been operating on all along. And that we would be able to use that roadway. I mean, we had discussions about the safety of the public being on that roadway and in proximity to the panels, and we were sure that wasn't an issue. So, I mean, I feel like, I mean, if we come back in a week and this is where we are, we can cross that bridge, but to me, it seems like we have another week to find out for sure what the requirements are regarding fencing, find out for sure what the feasibility is of trimming panels, to find out where we are with, you know, the width of the roadway. I think there's certain things there that we can investigate and try to find out where we are.
and where the existing trail is.
And where the, right, exactly.
Well, I guess I don't, and I know that you have been out there, and I do value that. I mean, I think that the easement, as sketched, was to provide the most flexibility possible while we're in this, you know, discussion involving the property owner, to give the city the most latitude to potentially even redirect a trail, which I've never hiked. I don't know if it's the best route, and maybe it is, or maybe it could be improved. And the easement was intended to stretch along the top to cover that road passage to potentially reroute an existing trail. I mean, it was not,
Right, so tying into that portion of the existing trail may not have been the goal. It may have been to tie into the network and to somehow reroute that. I don't know.
Was Conservation Commission informed of this, or did they have, they usually have maps of their trails that they can, you can request and they'll send them to you.
Yeah, I think it's more informal. I think this trail system is informal, and I think that the Concom, what they are doing is looking at their concerns, which is some kind of separation of the road from the detention basin. And we are just at that, we call it the groan zone,
right?
Yeah. Where we're just
Right,
not
but
quite,
they'll
we're not
be
quite
able
there.
to- you should
or
be
maybe
able
we
to-
are, but
You should be able to find out where those trails are and give them an idea how they're gonna
So we
match.
had that, the Pascano Trust submitted a trail map and we looked at that. I don't have it with me right now, but we can
Well,
find that
we'll
again.
have to look at it again.
I would suggest we set this issue aside for now and try to work on some of the other stuff, just to get us to
Can
a
I
finish
just
point.
bring up one last thing?
Yep.
I mean, so Soltage is gonna maintain this whole area.
Yep.
Right? Whether it's gravel road or grass, they're gonna maintain it. So I don't think they have an issue with how this easement is drawn.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that I can tell you, and to your point about we've got a week, well, we have to get everything to conservation. My colleague has been he's been going back and forth with them today. Everything has to be final. If they get it on Monday, that doesn't give us much time, and everybody's off Thursday and Friday.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're still planning to provide the easement. It's just instead of it being maintained as gravel, it's maintained as grass.
But it
No
also
vehicle-
doesn't make its way around to the northern border because of the fencing and the.
It can. The fence is here. I mean, if you want the easement to go all the way up here, I'm sure Soltis would be more than happy to still allow access up along the outside of the fence. It's just,
And then
it's on
there's
grass instead of gravel.
there's a retaining pond up there, is that right?
It's here, but there's still, and that's why we had to move this back, because the conservation commission wanted a grass strip, so there's still probably 30 feet between the basin and the fence for people that can walk all the way outside of the fence, along the fence here, and then get up to where it goes in the grass area. So it's just, it's grass, it's just not gravel, but it's a trail. I mean, I don't think we want to promote vehicular access here, either turn this into a four-wheeler spot.
This is much ado of nothing. Sorry, I know it's a disagreement point, but I do disagree.
All right, well, let's move on to the other stuff and get things checked off, I guess.
I think there was really only one other issue, and again, Soltis accommodated this, was, screening. So it's a little bit, I don't know if you can even see it on your 11 by 17, but it's really this inset area here.
Yep.
So this is for 11 and 15 Holly Circle. The request, as I understand it, last time was that the temporary fence be extended, and additional plantings also be provided, to provide screening to those properties, and that was, so if you look in that inset, this is where, those plantings were added.
And so this was an additional neighbor who showed up, right? Is that correct, Jeff?
Right,
Okay.
11.
At 11, right, because we had addressed 15 several times.
And you've been very specific here in what these plantings are, the juniper, the white fir, the arborvitae, and sort of staggered.
Yeah,
there.
so they're all evergreens, right, so even in the winter, they still provide screening.
And it looks like there's quite a few of them, 3, 6, 9, maybe a dozen each, something like that. 3 sections.
Yeah, so, yeah, the planning schedule is there, yeah, that was added since the last meeting, just to accommodate that extra screening.
Okay. And there was an email from some of the other abutters about some of the screening and the planting. Have you seen that? Was that?
Yeah, I think I did. You know, in talking to Mike Zimmer and consulted about this, I mean, I think they've accommodated all the requests. I mean, their main concern is leaving this open-ended, right?
Yep.
Where you can't just have an unlimited budget of screening and trees and everything else. So, you know, they've gone out and done renderings, they've taken photographs from different angles, and, you know, based on those, tried to fill in some of the gaps where they think screening may be missing. So, you know, as a result, this is the most updated plan based on that.
And so I know one of the issues was sort of a concern by the abutters about maintaining the trees, that if they're planted and something happens, and it looks like there's a 1-year guarantee is all you guys are willing to offer on that, as far as making sure that the trees are there.
I thought, you know, you couldn't get a landscape contractor to warranty for 20 years. I mean, it's a year, that's a standard warranty.
Right, but I mean, if something were to happen, or, you know.
Within the year, then fine, we could replant it. But that would be the limit, would be a year.
Okay, I mean, even though this is a 20-year project on this parcel, and so if something happens 18 months in, we're talking 18 years without the screening?
No, because the rest of the surrounding vegetation growing as well. It'll be 20 years of growth with the surrounding vegetation that's already there.
That's part of the design, is why you had mentioned that they're sort of staggered. I mean, we have landscape architects that work for our company, and they, you know, come up with these sort of staggered designs so that, you know, some different species, yeah.
And also keep in mind that the largest area of screening is adjacent to the access road, which will be used during construction. After construction's over, there'll be a maintenance vehicle a couple times a year, that's it.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think the roadway screening is an easy one, because I think you're right, it's a very limited window. It's the residences that were further back that I think, depending on what happens with the plantings, you know, may or may not look out their window in a few years and see that, but I guess.
Providers are hardy. I think that's sufficient.
Any other comments, Jeff, from planning before we open it up to the public?
Not before you open it up to public,
Okay.
that's fine.
Anybody here want to come up? Please.
Hi, I'm Brenda Salyer, about our 21 Holly Circle. I wrote the email that you all received. Thank you for your response. Appreciate it. The issue is, I'm concerned that the plan itself is ambiguous. If you look at the notes on the landscape screening plan, it says quantities are shown for convenience only. Contractor to verify quantities and locations in the field. So in spite of what Mike said about, we feel we've, you know, and I do feel you've done a great job, don't get me wrong, but he made it sound like there's a good deal of specificity around this, and I'm just responding to the plan that he's referring to, where there's a great deal missing, I think. So the email was about, we couldn't tell from the plan how many is actually being planted here. So maybe I didn't say it properly, or, you know, in a clear way, but we're just looking for, I think, a little more specificity so that we're all in agreement come planting time as to what to expect. I don't want, you know, this to turn into a horror show come planting time. So I'm just concerned, because you refer to a plan that's well thought out, but you've left yourself a great deal of leeway with these notes. And also about the heights, as I recall the time we talked about it, we talked about a whole lot of things. And I just would really like to see if you could commit to, you know, higher trees when they're planted. Because you give a range, 6 to 8, 8 to 10, 4 to 6. We're just asking that you go with the higher side as the minimum. So it'll have, I mean, they don't grow that fast, so we're just hoping for a little more screening. So that's what this email is about, is these little notes leaving a great deal to be decided, you know, at the field come planting time. So I was just wanting to somehow say, can we work together come planting time, and we'll figure this out, since that's kind of what it says.
We can, yeah, when it comes to field specifics, then obviously if it needs to be moved a foot either way, or a couple of feet either way, then that's fine, and we could ask you guys to come along. But you know, we've got a drawing that we really need to stick to, and we can't, you know, try vary too much from the plan that's been submitted.
But you
With
say
the-
contractor to verify quantities and locations in the field.
Number 5, note number 5, right? Is that the one you're referring to?
Note number 2.
On the last page, it's the same
Oh,
language.
same language.
Same exact note.
Different.
I mean,
Yeah, I see.
I can address part of that at least. Sometimes the reason that we put this flexibility in is it depends on what trees are available from local nurseries. So, you know, as far as the 4 to 6, 6 to 8, 8 to 10 range,
Right.
it depends on what's available, right, locally. I mean, within a reasonable distance, Soltage isn't gonna have trees brought in from the west coast that meet exactly an 8-foot, right? So that's why we have that
Sure.
range in. And then as far as the contractor note, for there, I think the intent is that once they get out there, if what our landscape architect's shown may not work
Sure.
exactly with the landscape,
Right.
or maybe there's shallow ledge there, they can't plant it there.
Right.
Those are the types of things. So it gives them a little bit of flexibility moving around, but the intent is not that Soltage is saying, hey, we're gonna plant whatever it is, 30 trees out there, but hey, guess what, you only get 2.
Yeah.
Well, is there any way to amend the note, especially number 2? So, contractor to verify quantities and locations in the field to ensure that screening is provided, or the intent of screening is met. I mean, I think it's missing the qualifier of what you're trying to achieve.
I agree with
Yeah.
That, like, I think that's
Yeah, we'll
That's
look
like-
into
part
that,
that
and
needs
if the
like,
board is okay.
like the
with
contractor, I would believe, needs additional, like, a couple additional words to guide what they're
Sure.
shooting for. I think that's where it's pretty
I
open.
think for note 1 as well, I think the quantity issue, like, I understand if it's quantities, you know, if we can't get 35 of the George Peabody arborvitae, we have to do something else, but I think that the overall number, I mean, I think when we went through this the first time, we sort of looked literally like tree here, tree here, tree here. So I think that the quantities maybe of each kind or whatever the species is, maybe, you know, what's locally available and what meets the height requirements, but I mean, note 1 to me seems to say, we put these numbers in, but, you know, we might only put in 22 instead of 35, and I think it would be best to clarify. Since everything's gonna have to be in conformity with the plans, it makes it a little hard when there's 2 notes on the last page that sort of say, like, these plans are subject to change. So I think if we could tighten up that language to really meet the screening goal, I think that would make us feel better.
With regard to the tree heights, there's essentially 3 different ones that are staggered in, and one of them is smaller at 4 to 6, and the other 6 to 8, and the other 8 to 10, which means you do have a row of 8 to 10 foot trees, and
Right.
overall that should provide, I think, a good level of coverage. And I
Unless-
totally understand the desire to have higher, but personally, I feel 8 to 10
Yeah.
is a good
Well,
starting.
unless they can't find any, and all they can find are the sea green junipers.
Well, that's why we're saying, I mean, so that's where I think that what the notes need to specify is that, you know, you can replace the sea green juniper with a comparable tree that's 4 to 6 feet tall, but you can't replace, you know, instead of a 10-foot Canadian white fir with a, you know, 4-foot juniper. That doesn't accomplish the screening goal, which I think is what we've always been on the same page, but I think that the neighbors are just trying to make sure that everything is saying on the plans what we've sort of
Yeah.
always understood.
We just don't want any
And
conflict or
as far as
surprises.
so as far as the height range, I think, Brenda, that when we looked at this with the schematics, I think if that tallest tree is at least 8 feet tall,
Yes.
that gets us those line of sights. And again,
I agree.
you're
It's-
from your
it's
backyards, you're going to be able to stand there probably any time of year and make out what you see as the array, right? Like, it's not to make it invisible; it's to try to minimize and sort of soften that view.
Yes.
So I think even the low ends of those 3 ranges, as long as it's not the scenario you imagined,
Right.
which is we go with 3 4-foot junipers, and I don't think they ever intended that, but I think that if we can clarify that in the language, that it will be these staggered trees of these 3 heights, that will
And
make it clear.
a certain number of them that accomplish full coverage. I think those 2
Yeah.
are raising. Do you understand?
The objective of screening, right, and any replacements, comparable sizes and comparable screening ability.
That'd be perfect. I think that sounds good. Does that sound good for you guys?
Thank
you, Brenda?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's all she needs.
Anything else? Well, she hasn't left
Well,
yet.
I just want to
Wait a
revisit
minute,
this
you want
1-year
something
guarantee
else.
thing. I guess, you know, I'm thinking if you weren't seeking a waiver of the buffer zone, none of this would even be being discussed. The buffer zone thrives, but you are likely gonna you know, get an amended buffer zone agreement where you get to come on it and cut down trees for 20 years, you know, if they are over 20 feet. So I don't know why the same attitude, you know, doesn't hold for these trees. I mean, I understand the contracts are with the landscaper and all that, but I don't know, it just seems, since you are gonna have access to that buffer zone for 20 years, that there's some responsibility to maintain, you know, our buffer to this buffer zone that you're getting access to. If you weren't getting access to the buffer zone, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So, I guess, can we talk about that a little bit?
Well, our operations and maintenance is just limited to our lease area.
Yeah.
Not uptight against the no. So we're just going to be maintaining in our leased area.
Right. Unless a tree goes over 20 feet and it's affecting your panels, then you.
I think that's the one exception.
Right, you are getting an exemption, so that's.
Wouldn't the lease area cover the area up to the property lines? We have not seen a lease area map, but.
Because these aren't on our property, they're on your property.
But so even if it's not the leased area, I think that what Brenda's saying is, you know, you're gonna have these, you know, what is it, 60 trees or whatever that are part of the screening process, and I think we can all assume that once they get planted, they're gonna be fine for 20 years and they'll continue to grow and thrive, but if some of them don't, that these are items, just like you'd be keeping an eye on the trees that get above the height where it screens your arrays, that you might also keep an eye on these, and if something happens to one of them where it impedes the screening, that there'd be some oversight and handling that.
I mean, we could say unless the buffer zone has grown up and they're redundant. You know, I mean, you don't need to replace something if it's no longer needed. Like, what if a tree grows up behind it and it's
Well,
not.
I think what you would say, right, is you could just have language that says, you know, that they'll replace a tree to the extent that it somehow dies or is damaged and,
Right.
you know, is no longer able to screen the array or something. Because I think
Right.
also you can see with the staggered trees that if you've got the arborvitae and the white fir and a sea green juniper in front of it dies and the other two have grown in, that may be
Right.
totally irrelevant.
Exactly.
But
That's
it
right.
is a long window to expect that all of these trees will all survive and continue to screen. And Brenda is right, I mean, you are gonna sort of have continued access and operation over that buffer area, so it would seem reasonable that while you're still keeping some of the trimming going on, that you might also preserve the buffer for that period as well, or at least the screening of the buffer.
I think if there's language around where Jesse was just at, that if the tree was providing screening and it dies, that would be ideal for replacement. There could be another scenario, I think, as Brenda said, where it actually is no longer applicable and they
Right.
wouldn't take issue with that.
Yes.
I mean, the analogy I have to put out is that if this were sort of like screening adjacent to a road and you're really trying to block or screen the array, you know, you would be maintaining that shrub for perpetuity. So I think we want to be right in the middle there.
Can I clarify, are we just talking about these screenings that have been proposed, or are you talking about everything in the buffer zone?
No, I think we were talking about the
Just
screening installed.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I think that's a fair analogy, Jeff. I mean, I think that the purpose of them is to screen while we're trimming in the buffer area, and I think we can all expect that, you know, 95% of them will do their job for 20 years, but if something happens and it does leave a gaping hole where someone's looking out their backyard, it seems reasonable that Soltage would come in and replace that tree, or
The first year, yeah. Again, it's in a buffer zone. We're not going to be maintaining in that buffer zones.
But if there's a tree right next to the screening that gets to be 45 feet tall and it starts to impact your array, you're going to go in there and take that down. We talked about that, right? So it's not fair to say that you're not going into the buffer zone. You're maintaining the right to go in there under your proposal and continue to trim trees. So I think that it's not unreasonable for the neighbors to say during the same time period, while you can go in and trim, you also just need to make sure that if something catastrophic happens to one of these 60 trees, and it no longer is able to screen in the way that we all obviously intended, that it would be replaced.
I'll have to vet go back to Mike and that, but he was very specific that, you know,
Okay.
that's not our,
I understand that you may not be able to make that, like, pass that claim on to the landscaper, right? That makes perfect sense to me, and so it might be a little more exposure for you guys, but I think it's worth investigating, because I think that there's some logic to what Brenda's mentioning here.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Anybody else? Comments, questions, thoughts? Okay. So, we gotta wait for Concom before we can vote, and I think we need to,
Decide Tuesday or Wednesday?
I think we should definitely do Tuesday.
Is
So
that the only thing on our agenda that day?
There will be something else, I believe, right?
No, it was in case one varies, so no.
Oh,
that would
that's
be the
right,
only thing,
yeah, so that would be the only
Yeah.
thing, and,
6 PM?
yeah, and so then just before we motion, so then we'll all do a little more research on the need and options on the issue with the easement, and you'll get back to us on the sort of warranty stuff and the revised language for the plans on the screening, and hopefully we can get over that last yard.
Can we just talk about that easement?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much flexibility this, certainly, you know, Steve, we talked about the fencing, that going with a wood section and then 2 metal ones doesn't provide the same bonding. I just don't know if this is the wrong drawing, but, you know, again, my main point being that they're gonna grant access. It's just, instead of gravel, it's grass, which would presumably be similar to the trail.
Well, so, I mean, I
Which
think
you're maintaining.
Right.
Which is being maintained, yeah.
So I think what we're gonna do on our end is we're gonna look at the maps that Piscomic gave us, and we can probably reach out to them and talk to them about whether this satisfies what they would need to do. What I heard a couple answers that you gave, and they were all qualified as sort of, I'm not an electrical engineer, you know, there was a lot of qualifications. So if you come back and you have it on firm authority that there's no fencing that can go in there, the road can't be narrowed, the road can't be moved further away, and we can't trim any panels off the edge there for room for a fence without making this project financially unfeasible, then we'll have to figure out what we're gonna do then. But that wasn't all definitive in your presentation before. So I think that I need to know what facts we're operating under before we deviate from the plan that we've sort of talked about for the last few months.
My main concern at this point is that we've got to issue these drawings as final to the Conservation Commission. And then presumably they approve it next Monday, then we come back in here and you say, nope, we still don't like those answers, you need to do this and change this. Then we're back in front of Conservation because you guys said, nope, you gotta move the road 4 feet that way, and this could just be an endless circle and then there's no project.
Right, and I get that, and so, I mean, I can't tell you that we're not gonna, I mean, we have our own obligations, right? And so I think we've been very cognizant, we've been trying to work really hard to meet your timeline, we've been following along the process the whole way. But I mean, we have to do what we have to do, right? And so I fully expect that you can figure out in a quick period of time whether any of those options we just talked about are possible. And if they're not, then you're not gonna change your plans at all, and those will be final to Concom. And you'll come back to us, and then we'll have to make a decision, we'll vote on it. But we can't give you a conditional or a qualified answer right now. I mean, I think,
understand. I'm just
and I know it's frustrating, and I know we've been doing this for months. I mean, our first site visit, I think, was back in July or August. It was 1,000,000 degrees, and now we're freezing to death going home. And so, I mean, we're trying really hard to keep to your schedule too, because I think we all want to at least give you a fair shot to get in the line and make this project happen. And so, I mean, you're right. We're going to have limited options. In a typical scenario, if you came back on that Tuesday meeting before us and we didn't like it, we might still be able to more freely bump it to another date. And we're going to know that if we do that now, it may kill the project. So
Right.
that's something that's going to tie our hands to some extent, but it may also, I mean, I don't know that this easement is a fatal scenario, but there's things you could come back with next Tuesday and say, we've changed this, and we would say, I'm sorry, your project's not gonna go forward because we can't approve it tonight, right? I mean, that's just a given. So I think you do what you can to make sure you're satisfying Concom, and we'll try to get some information on our side from Piscomic. You guys can see for sure if there is any way to sort of make this a little more feasible, and we'll figure out what it is when we all get back here Tuesday night.
Jesse, one thing, and I agree with what you said, but the issue really seems to be about the connection point to the trail, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of them.
And, well, and you having final
designs that show the appropriate connection point, right? Which means that if we were to have the discussion with Concon and come back on Tuesday at the point at which they have to finally be too late, the Pascomic, did I say Concon? I meant Pascomic. The Pascomic conversation with them, so they know where that goes in the design, needs to happen before. So that it
Well,
can
no,
be
so
in
they
the
don't,
design.
so the easement
Yeah.
isn't gonna show an actual physical trail.
Correct.
It's just gonna give us that access. And so, all they need to do, so what is gonna happen in this area is stuff that they're gonna have to figure out. So whether, if we use all that space and going up here and reroute it, or if we go in over this side as they propose, that won't change anything from Concom's plans, because that's not reflected on the plan.
Well, I think I understand Member Zarvis's concerns to really be working to get you the approval, which I think is inherently part of what Mr. Zarvis needs to do. I just want to be clear to Rob that in the previous discussions, the intent of the city overall over the course of the next 20 years would be a multi-use path that connects from Plain Street, which is south of the property, through existing protected open space across this parcel to the city parcel to the north. The value that is not coming through in this revision tonight is using that road that's constructed. I mean, that's the value that is lost right now, and in the previous discussions, why there was like high fives and applauses when the Gauls approved kind of the easement over what we had been talking about. So it's just a very new twist. I would ask that you just explore all options and come back on Tuesday with a fence that is not encapsulating that road would probably be this would be a 15-minute meeting on Tuesday.
So that's your preference?
That's our preference. Our preference would be that we could still go up on that road and use that for the easement. As Jeff said, I mean, if that's impossible, then we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But I want to make sure that that's definitively impossible before we move on to the next steps, because I didn't quite hear that today, and I don't want to make this drastic of a decision if it's not, our only way forward.
Yeah, no, I mean,
And I say this, I mean, groan zone is right, like I'm groaning in my head here, because you guys have been incredibly accommodating from the beginning.
Right.
And at the last meeting, I thanked you for everything you guys had done and the neighbors, and I really do appreciate it. It's just getting like over the last 1 yard line here. And I really do appreciate the effort you guys have gone through to sort of try to get this easement in place when it's not your easement right. And frankly, this last hurdle isn't even your hurdle, it's from Concon. Like, I get all of that, and I'm really sympathetic. I just want to make sure that we're protecting everything we can and doing as well as we can for the city and the neighbors. All right, and we'll try to make this super quick on Tuesday next week, and Jeff's gonna work all night getting a final decision out, so you can have it first thing Wednesday morning.
Well, I would ask, and this will be laborious, and I apologize, but can the board go through quickly the conditions? Because I think we want to make sure that other than what was just talked about, we're pretty clear for something that we want to do quick on Tuesday. So the page numbering, I'm losing page 6.
I'm missing page 6.
This is that page? Yes, this.
I thought
I don't.
we did. We just went through them. But I mean, it's understandable.
They are articulated in writing in this one, which I don't believe that this has page 6.
Did this, you have one with
Yeah,
page
last
6?
meeting.
Will you pass it down to me?
Yeah.
Did this get sent to the applicant? If so, it was last
today,
night.
yeah, or
Okay.
yeah.
I looked at, are those the conditions?
Yeah.
Well, this is not just the conditions. This is a draft decision.
Oh, okay.
So it's more encompassing. It has proposed findings, which I'm willing to spare everyone those details. But
Okay, so
conditions are important.
I will read these 12 conditions so that we can see if there's any issues that anybody needs to address. So, number 1 would be that any solar energy facility which has reached the end of its useful life or has been abandoned shall be removed. When the solar energy facility is scheduled to be decommissioned, the applicant shall notify the city by certified mail of the proposed date of discontinued operations and plans for removal. The owner-operator shall physically remove the solar facility no more than 150 days after the date of discontinued operations. At the time of removal, the solar facility site shall be restored to the state it was in before the facility was constructed or any other legally authorized use. More specifically, decommissioning shall consist of A, physical removal of all solar structures, equipment, security barriers, and transmission lines from the site. B, disposal of all solid and hazardous waste in accordance with local and state waste disposal regulations. C, stabilization or revegetation of the site as necessary to minimize erosion. The permit granting authority may allow the owner to leave landscaping or designated below-grade foundations in order to minimize erosion and disruption to vegetation.
So that's straight. That's straight out of the ordinance,
That's
and
the ordinance,
I could
yeah.
wonder that there's one clause in there that was that and this is in that paragraph. At the time of removal, the solar facilities shall be restored to the state it was in before. So that I can see that I mimic the ordinance language. So that would likely be changed to. We have language in the decommissioning plan.
Yeah,
that
we talked about that.
states-
That obviously you don't have to replant wilderness and shrubbery for the area that's cleared. Right, it would be meadow. That's
Okay.
exactly right. And I think we had language from prepared that we could put in there for that section.
Okay.
Number 2 would be prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall provide the city with a financial surety to cover the cost of decommissioning in the event the lessee or owner fails to perform, and the city must remove the project and remediate the site. The amount shall be at $112,000 pursuant to section 7.3.8.6 of the zoning ordinance. Said surety amount shall be subject to an increase of 2% per year with annual interest compounding for the life of the project. The surety may be established through payments over time from the lessee to the owner of the project site and shall be fully funded within 10 years. Any documents and the agreement shall be in a form satisfactory to city attorney and then be submitted to the planning board at a public meeting prior to the issuance of a building permit for this project. The scope and activities included in the decommissioning plan shall be substantially in accordance with the information included in the application packet dated whatever.
Blank, yeah.
3.
So just
Yep.
That language was provided by Mike Zimmer, and it's mirroring approval
Our
of
bylaw.
Shutesbury, and then the city attorney reviewed that in terms of the Shutesbury numbers, and so there was coordination there. So that should be something that you were aware of. It's basically the language that was provided to us and reviewed by the city attorney. So.
Number 3 will be prior to commencing land clearing and/or tree removal activity, the applicant shall notify the planning department and building department in writing a minimum of 5 days in advance and submit documentation of any proposed or contemplated changes to the approved vegetation plan. So we discussed that last time as well. Number 4, tree removal associated with this project shall be done strictly in accordance with the proposed vegetation plans last revised on blank. In accordance with Note 4, the applicant may prune, top, or cut trees that grow in the future to a height greater than 20 feet and whose shadow at the length of 3 times the height of the tree would intersect the solar array, except for those trees within 10 feet of the southern property line.
Right, and so that's just putting the language of Note 4 into that condition, which we talked about last time.
Number 5, tree planting screening associated with this project shall be done in accordance with the proposed vegetation plans, last revised on blank. Specifically, this shall include plantings as shown on and or adjacent to the properties of 11 Holly Circle, 15 Holly Circle, 21 Holly Circle, 23 Holly Circle, and 33 Holly Circle. In addition, a construction fence in accordance with the specifications submitted shall be installed adjacent to 11 Holly Circle and 15 Holly Circle. All screening, plantings, and fence shall be installed prior to the commencement of any site work associated with the project. Number 6, prior to the issuance of a building permit, the owner, in coordination with the city and the applicant, shall have granted a trail easement as schematically shown in Exhibit A to allow the city to construct, pass and repass, and maintain, and to allow the public to pass and repass on foot, in, over, on, and through the easement area. The easement shall be substantially in accordance with the provisions identified in the letter from the landowner dated blank. The applicant shall provide the city with a meets and bounds description of the easement area suitable for recording at the Registry of Deeds.
We talked about that last time. Yeah.
Can I just clarify one thing?
Mhm.
On the planting of those screening trees, it
Yep.
says that no site work will be done before those are planted. I just want to clarify and make sure that everybody understands that removal of the other trees up to that point is not part of the site work, right? Because those trees need to be removed to get to that point, right? Or trimmed.
To get to the
Is that
point where you're going to install the,
Right, where they're
right.
gonna be installed, yeah.
And there was previous discussion that almost all of these property owners basically agreed to allow you to potentially access that area from
Yeah.
their properties.
Oh,
That's
okay.
not necessarily in here,
Yeah.
and it could be, but that seemed like that was understood from the
Okay.
previous.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's okay. Number 7, prior to the issuance of a certificate of compliance, the applicant shall have coordinated and held an emergency personnel training with applicable city officials. I think we discussed that before. Number 8, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, lawn care chemicals, or other leachable materials shall be used in accordance with the lawn care regulations of the Massachusetts Pesticide Board. 33 CMR 10.03, 30, and 31, as amended with manufacturer's label instructions and all other necessary precautions to minimize adverse impacts on surface and groundwater.
Again, that's pulled from the Aquifer Protection Overlay District.
Right.
I mean, that's right from the ordinance.
Number 9, the project shall be in compliance with the Conservation Commission's order of conditions and stormwater permit issued on blank. Number 10, the applicant shall maintain the solar energy facility in good condition. Maintenance shall include, but not be limited to, painting, structural repairs, and integrity of security measures. Site access shall be maintained to a level acceptable to the fire chief and emergency medical services. The project owner shall be responsible for the cost of maintaining the solar energy facility and any access roads, and the cost of repairing any damage occurring as a result of operation and construction. Number 11, all material modifications to a solar energy facility made after issuance of the permit shall require approval by the permit granting authority as provided in this section. And number 12, the applicant or facility owner shall maintain a phone number and identify a responsible person for the public to contact with inquiries and complaints throughout the life of the project. Said contact and any subsequent changes in information shall be filed and kept with the project file in the city clerk's office.
So that's a new one.
Yep.
And I believe that the first sentence is in our ordinance. The second sentence I added after hearing, it's 20 years, so a lot can happen. And so the burden will be on whomever owns the array or is responsible for filing the documentation with the clerk. And the clerk, I thought about filing with the planning department, but you don't want to see our files, really. The clerk is our record keeper, and so she holds a copy of the decided special
file.
permit.
Yep.
With the appeal period done, so that made the most sense. Something I may actually use in the future, where they could submit to the clerk. It's not filing at the registry, but it'll be on file there. If someone has an issue, they go to the clerk. If the information is not up to date, then someone will be trying to find whoever is responsible. But
Right.
that's kind of the chain of
That makes
command
sense.
there. Okay.
That's easy enough, right? Okay, so any of those pose any problems for you guys at this point? Okay, I think we discussed them. Yeah.
I think he's seen this, isn't he, Jim?
Yeah, I think the only new one on here was that last one
Yeah.
that we hadn't discussed at all, but that's
Right.
simply notifying a contact, making sure there's a contact person on file.
Asset management.
That's easy. Okay, so any other comments or questions from the public about this? All right, then,
I motion to continue the Easthampton Park One Solar LLC special permit to Monday, the 27th of November at 6 p.m.
Tuesday,
Tuesday.
the 27th.
I wrote Monday. Bad Jim.
Can I get-
6 p.m. you said?
Yeah. Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed, abstaining? All right.
Thank you.
Almost there, guys. Thank you. Can I get the most important motion?
A motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.